Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to my medieval sewing party. I am the Contessa, the creative Contessa, and I'm here to get creative together with you while sharing a variety of learnings about medieval material culture. And as always, we will be starting with the traditional checking of the sound quality. So please let me know if you can hear me. Otherwise, I'll wait to hear back from you. In the meanwhile, I will continue with the next tradition of the medieval sewing party at this point, the getting dressed. And I just realized I did not check my distance very well on this. Okay, so let's go ahead and gown up. I'm going to be putting on a gown I haven't worn actually since August. So many of you have not yet seen this gamora. This is a 15th century or 1480 Florentine dress modeled on one of the gowns that you see in the Cappella Maggiore in Santa Maria Novella in Florence, one of the famous Ghirlandaio frescoes that is part of the Tornabuoni chapel there at the behind the altar or surrounding the altar of Santa Maria Novella. And it's a very famous sequence of portraits depicting the life of the birth of John the Baptist and the birth of the Virgin. And it is very particularly famous because it depicts real people from 1470s, 1480s Florence wearing real clothes. So not just the fantasy biblical figures, but also actual members of the Tornabuoni family. So it's a fantastic resource for visuals on how people dressed in 1480s Florence. And this is a gown I made 22 years ago. So quite a long time ago, but it was made using a fabric I found on the $1 a yard bin at Jomar's in Philadelphia that looks almost exactly like the fabric depicted on one of the ladies in the Tornabuoni sequence. And so they're pretty certain it is Simonetta Vespucci who is displayed in this gown. There's also a death portrait of her, a posthumous death portrait of her, and a portrait that might be posthumous or might not be of her wearing this gown. And so that was my model for the dress, but I never finished all the things I wanted to do to the sleeves, of course, and never got around getting back to it because by the time I got around to get back and finish the sleeves, I had learned so much more about 15th century Italian clothing that I didn't bother to put more effort into this dress. So this one, I really generally only break it out for events where I need a lot of clothes. For example, a 2-week camping event where I'm going to need a lot of different clothes to stay fresh and looking Contessa-like for the duration. Audio bono, excellent. Oh, Shellback Bow, ciao. How's it going? And also, you're now a member. Thank you for becoming a member, Shellback. That's fantastic. Really appreciate that. So, just getting dressed here. This is a much easier process if I have a damsel, a companion, but I have no such accommodations at this point. It's okay. My general approach is to mess with the sleeves after I've laced up. So we're going to go ahead and lace up using a freshly woven, freshly braided tie I just made actually in one of the recent medieval crafting parties. This is a broad lace of 5 boas, as it is referred to in the original 15th century source. And that's where the word lace comes from, like shoelace, to lace something up. And these last a very long time, undergoing a lot of high traffic use. And then when they eventually do break, just like modern shoelaces break, by the way, these medieval ones made using silk break come apart with much less frequency than the garbage modern laces that are often being made and put into shoes these days. And when it does eventually break, as it will, usually it breaks right about in the middle. And so that leaves me with 2 still fairly long pieces that I can use for things like finishing my braids off, like I did there, for instance. So is anyone working on any projects at all of their own today? I will be continuing to work on my new Burgundian gown, the sleeves specifically. And then I think actually that will probably take us through to the end of today's sewing party. I don't think we'll get past that. I actually from the I have a travel channel for those who don't know, Travels with the Creative Contessa, and I did a Travel Buzz live stream the other day, and during it I did some finger loop braiding to keep my hands occupied, and I gave myself a blister actually. Let's see if you can see the blister. So some of you are asking, do you ever get blisters? I do. I do get blisters from finger loop braiding, from lace making, if I go too long without doing it and I lose the calluses that I've built up. So it's clear it's been too long since I last made laces using silk, and so I clearly need to rebuild my calluses on my fingers. I suspect that the silk women who made these laces from the 12th through the 16th century probably had pretty leather-like fingers in certain very specific spots from the daily activity of lace making. Let's see. Let me see. Second diaper changing hour for kid number 3. Oh my goodness. Oh geez, Shellback, are we having? Does someone have an unhappy stomach or an infection? There's actually a stomach virus going around in the U.S. On the East Coast right now. I have several acquaintances and friends who have been struck low by it. So hopefully you don't have something similar, because what they had was pretty violent. Let me see. And Susan just picked up her copy of Il Magnifico from the library. Pretty awesome. Have you started reading it yet, Susan? So lacing with an actual medieval lace, there's natural elasticity, even though you might not expect that because of the nature of the braiding that is involved in making these laces. So there is an elasticity, which means as you lace along and as you pull on the laces, there will actually be more and more give created. So you have to occasionally adjust, right, and pull your lace up. In this case, I'm not actually certain that this lace is long enough for this dress. We'll see, because this dress has a pretty wide open V in the front. It was designed that way. And if it doesn't go all the way up, then I'll figure it out. So that's also why I'm making it maybe a little tighter than I might normally wear it over my stomach, but that's okay. I don't plan for eating for several hours. No need for room. So for those of you just joining, welcome to Medieval Sewing Party with the Creative Contessa. I'm the Contessa. We are starting with my traditional getting dressed, and I am lacing up my gamora, which is a 15th century foundational garment in the Italies, worn everywhere. This is actually, believe it or not, an underlayer. It's an intermediary layer. So it goes over the camicia, and it will actually, if I were leaving the house, I would put another layer on over top of this. Either a giornea or a toppa, or there's a couple of other options that I could possibly put on. Only serving women and women of a very working class would go out and about in just a gamora like this. Everyone else, men included, puts on layers above the intermediary layers. So that's all laced up. And now we adjust the camicia, because this camicia wasn't necessarily made for this dress. So just make it all nice and neat, like so. And now we will adjust the sleeves. And yes, these sleeves are fiddly. Servants didn't have sleeves this fiddly. Servants had sleeves that were generally maybe only had an opening over the elbow, possibly one little single opening here, but generally they are mostly solid sleeves, because yeah, this kind of sleeve is a little bit fiddly. Also, servants would frequently, if they were menial servants doing washing dishes, engaging in those kind of tasks, they would often remove their sleeves so that they could roll up their camicia sleeves and engage in the dirty work, as it were. Laundresses, for example, laundry women are among the categories of women who are nearly always depicted in a gamora that has no sleeves, and or with their sleeves completely rolled up. This is definitely easier to do if I have another person, but I can do it on my own, as you can see. Yep. Let me see. The baby likes to poop, wait for us to change her diaper, and then poop again. It's just how she is. She giggles as we change her. I have cats like that. They use the litter box. I clean the litter box. They're in it the second I put the scoop down, right? And I can hear their little feline chortles of laughter mocking me as I sigh and walk away from the now freshly cleaned and freshly besmirched litter box. Yep. So is anyone working on any projects today? Anything, any interesting research? I've been doing some fascinating reading, plunging ever deeper into the topic of medieval hygiene and medieval etiquette because of a live stream a short that I spun off from one of these live streams. My most popular video ever, tragically, is a 1-minute rant about why I don't like Hollywood movie productions, right? All these videos, these getting dressed videos with in-depth research and history accompanying them, video essays about a wide array of medieval cultural topics, again with primary source citations included, original imagery of original medieval objects and art, all of that work put into for years. And what is the most popular video ever that's almost at 1 million views is me whining for for a minute about the garbage that is medieval Hollywood movies or Hollywood productions set in the Middle Ages. And that has, of course, triggered a bunch of people to come back with, it's not true, they were dirty, they were filthy, medieval Europe stank, medieval Europeans were disgusting, blah, blah, blah. Which, of course, I am pretty oppositional to defiance. So it's caused me to double down on my stance of medieval Europeans were not across the board dirty. Medieval Europeans wore colorful clothes at all levels of society. And here's why. Here's the evidence for it. So I've been plunging even further into the world of medieval manuals of hygiene and medieval books of etiquette that lay out in very nice detail exactly what was expected of a person, a proper member of society. How often were they expected to bathe? Were they expected to wash in other ways? How were they expected to conduct themselves at table, right? So I have found more books of etiquette and manuals from earlier periods that I hadn't anticipated. For instance, there's a 12th/early 13th century book of etiquette called the Book of the Civilized Man, that actually details in like 2,200 lines how a person should conduct themselves, right? Okay, so this is as dressed as I'm going to be getting today. I guess I'll go ahead and floof the camecha out. Again, this is easier if I have someone else to tighten the laces and do the floofing. But when your sleeve, some people think that these poofs are supposed to be fake. I don't think they were fake. I think they really were the camecha coming through the laces. And the reality is that if your sleeve is tight enough, they'll stay just like that. And this sleeve is tight enough on my arm, right? If your sleeve is too loose, as some of mine are actually, then the little poofs will not stay poofed. But if the sleeve is tight enough, it will. Okay, so questions about the 15th century Italian Gamora? Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and get started on the sewing part of today's live stream. Oh, no bling. Good point, bling. Where did my bling go? Oh gosh, I cleaned up today. That was a mistake. Good point. Every lady needs a little touch of something, eh? Oh, what did I do with my... Okay, so today I'm actually going to be putting on a simpler piece that was made by a friend for me who was taking a medieval jewelry making class, and she made this for me. And those are actually garnets, believe it or not. And this is modeled off of a piece that you see in a couple of different Flemish portraits from the 15th century. So it's a simpler, more modest version of what I often wear, but I do really like it. It's very nice. And we do know that 15th century Florentine women absolutely, and men absolutely, had jewelry from Flanders, jewelry from Germany, jewelry from France. And we know this, for instance, because in the death inventory of Lorenzo de' Medici taken in 1494, his palazzo is full of gems and jewels, and the origins of many of those gems and jewels are mentioned. And the jewels specifically, they're wrought by craftsmen from all over Europe, not just Florence. So it is absolutely authentic for a 1470s or 1480s Florentine patrician lady to have a piece or two or many of jewelry from places like the Low Countries. Yeah. Okay, and yeah, this was a gift, complete surprise. I was absolutely so honored that she made this for me. She also made a wonderful J for my medieval living history name, which is Judith, to pin onto my hood with my Burgundian headdresses. Unfortunately, the pin came out at the middle of a camping event with just nothing but lots of long grass. We were in the middle of a field that had been beaten down, and so that's archaeologists will find that in 1,000 years, and they'll wonder what this medieval piece-looking jewelry is doing in a strata from the mid or first quarter of the 21st century. Yeah, here's to confusing archaeologists, right? My goal in life is to get so authentic in my kit that I am the source of confusion for archaeologists in 1,000 years. Okay, John Darland says, beautiful backdrop. Yes, this is, for those who don't recognize this is the Lady and the Unicorn, La Dame à la Licorne, which is housed at the Musée de Cluny in Paris, has its own room for this series of tapestries. It's a series of 6 tapestries, right? And each one, 5 of them depict the 5 senses, and the 6th one depicts désir, desire. This one, as you can tell, portative organ, it is therefore the sound of the sense of hearing, right? And so we have the fantastical lady dressed in 15th century fantasy clothing, playing a portative organ, while her damsel, depicted smaller, not necessarily just to represent her younger age, but possibly also her lower rank, which was a convention in some medieval art, who is actually operating the bellows by hand. Right. Have any of you played a portative organ? I love playing the portative organ. I'm not good at it. I've only gotten to play it a couple of times, but I just love sitting there like a lady dressed like this and just play. It just feels so magical and medieval to do that. So yeah, this is a replica. It is woven with a tapestry weave, and it's linen and wool, but it's actually been silk screened. This one has been silk screened. But this is 80 years old. It's an antique in and of itself, right? And so it's one of these fantastic eBay finds. I have a whole video on this channel if you're interested in finding your own medieval replica tapestries for a reasonable price, care and feeding of them, how to find good deals on them. There's a whole video I've got on that. If you look up tapestry and click under videos so that it's the long format content, you can find that. Okay, so everyone, take a moment to like and subscribe if you haven't. Double tap your screen if you're on a mobile device, and that will certainly bring us to liking things. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and bring over my little sewing table here, and we're going to get sewing. And I will continue holding forth about the rabbit holes down which I have more recently fallen, shall we say. So first off, rabbit hole I'd like to share with you all. I know this isn't book corner, but that's okay. Dining at the Safavid court. So this isn't a recent acquisition. I mean, it's relatively recent. I got it months ago, but I finally really started reading through it earnestly. This is 16th/17th century Persian cuisine. And what's lovely about this is that it is a translation of the original cooking manual. This was written by one of the head cooks of the court, the Persian court, the Safavid court at this time. He had this composed for, of course, his Shah, the King of Kings. And it has a number of recipes that in some ways look very similar to modern Persian cuisine, and in other ways are completely different. So really fascinating stuff in here. I like the way this is laid out because it actually includes beautiful art from the era, right? So it's scattered with all of these original 16th and 17th century Persian art, depicting people, men and women, engaged in various food-related activities usually. Like, look at this. Someone actually bathing, participating in hygiene. So we've got some very interesting art that is included with all of these really delicious recipes, both in the original language, which can be very confusing, of course, and then it provides the back half is redacted recipes laid out step by step. So if you don't want to, puzzle your way through the translation of the original Persian, then you can just go right to the back and start making 16th and 17th century Persian food. Yeah, really love it. Yeah. So yeah, dining at the Safavid court. And yes, you notice that there was you notice the prevalence of ultramarine, right? Ultramarine pigment, which is lapis lazuli. Now, granted, ultramarine was not so expensive in Persian illumination as it was in European illumination because Persia had access to lapis lazuli mines, I'm pretty certain, in this era, right? Whereas the Europeans didn't. So, yeah. Okay, Persian cuisine is definitely top 5 best cuisines in the world. 100% agree with you. I love Persian cuisine as much as I love Indian cuisine, and they're so fantastically different from each other. The sweets and the sours of Persian cuisine, and that sweet and sour, the things that make Persian cuisine so wonderful to me, the combination of sweet, sour, and savory, 100% reflected in 16th and 17th century recipes. Lots of lemon juice combined with raisins, combined with date syrup, combined with, all the wonderful spices, meat. So yeah, these recipes, there's a whole section on just rice, like pilafs, different kind of pilafs. So apparently pilafs were still absolutely a very popular and major component of Persian cuisine, even in the 16th and 17th century. So dining at the Safavid court. Good for people who just want to make 16th, 17th, or 17th century Persian dishes. Also for people who want to see what the original recipes were like and maybe redact them themselves. Okay. Yeah, ultramarine really is such a beautiful blue. And even the word for me, I know, outre-mer, ultramarine literally means across the sea, but linguistic, as a linguist, just the sounds, the phonemes of the word ultramarine are just really beautiful to me. I know it's linguistic geekery, but there it is. Right. Okay. So is anyone, other than changing diapers from children who like to torture their parents, is anyone working on any creative projects today? I will show you what I am currently working on. So I have finished, stand back, this is a sleeve. Oh, damn, I can't put it over top of this one either. This is a sleeve of my new Burgundian gown. It's inside out. Right, so you can still see all of the basting stitches. That's what the long stitches are, thread glue as I call it. And then you can see the finer lines of the running back stitch, which is the actual stitches. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out these running stitches because I'm a big believer, especially this was cotton thread. This wasn't just garbage thread. This was cotton thread. And I'm a big believer, when possible, of saving the thread from your basting stitches and reusing it. Right. And for those who are wondering the linguistic difference between, some of you have said, I've never heard of basting in the context of sewing. So to baste something together in the context of sewing means to use thread to basically make it stick together, like long running stitches like this. And then you pull the pins out, and then you go back over with your running back stitch or your whatever your actual stitch is, because the basting stitches will allow the fabric to lie flat, ungathered and unbunched in a natural way for you to put your proper stitches in place. Whereas if you just sew straight over pins, you could end up with unintentional gathers and pleats and whatnot that change the shape of your garment. So especially when you're hand sewing, it's especially important to pin, then basting stitch with long running stitches, and then pull the pins and put your final stitches in place. Right. And because I used a pretty high quality cotton thread for this, I'm not just going to cut it and rip it out. I actually want to save it so that I can use it for future uses, because I'm that kind of person. I was raised to be super frugal. Darn it, where are the other spools? Over here, maybe? I was raised to be super frugal, and I always looked for ways to conserve rather than waste. Aha. Okay. So here are my medieval spool bundles, replica medieval spools. And this is one of those examples of lace making, of finger loop braiding I did in one of my recent live streams with Philip from Irish Medieval History, actually. And because it has this big error in the middle of it where I got distracted by someone asking a question that took all of my attention, I've saved this and I use it, for instance, to just bundle up my medieval spools to keep them from unraveling in their pouches and boxes, because medieval spools don't have little notches in them. They don't have notches like modern spools of thread do. So that means that this end, especially on silky silk thread, is likely to try to unwind. And I found that if I use, especially if I use something nice and broad, like this lace of broad chevron of 8 bows, right, then it not only does it keep it from unwinding, but it also protects the thread from wear and tear, from being jostled about when I transport it. Because of course, we modern medievalists have to devise solutions for problems that didn't exist in the Middle Ages, because we live in the modern world. So for instance, medieval ladies didn't generally drag their sewing out with them wherever they went, like I do, so that when I'm at a cafe or something, I can work on my projects. Therefore, their thread basically usually stayed at home, and it wasn't jostled about violently on a regular basis, causing it to fuzz up. I, on the other hand, travel a lot, and I take my hand sewing with me wherever I go, which means I'm taking my spools of thread with me wherever I go, which means they end up frizzing out, from being jostled about inside their cases. But I've discovered if I completely mummify it in these samples, these medieval lace samples that I've made, the broad ones especially, then not only does it not unwind, it doesn't get all fuzzy. Yeah. Let me see. Okay, Tea with Tosh, welcome. Lovely to see you. Okay, I'm just going to scroll back. Sorry. So some of you may know the way the live stream works is I am paying attention to the live chat, but I go off on a monologue and then I reach the end of my monologue and then I check back through the live chat. So I'm not ignoring you. You just know that that's my method. Monologue, check, engage, monologue, engage. So let me just scroll back let me see, I'm drinking a highball and holding the baby before I get a nap in. Good on you. Good on you, Shellback Bow. Rice fed billions of persons. Just saying. Yeah, 100%. Unfortunately, a lot of people are eating large quantities of rice and other refined carbohydrates, not just rice, in ways that they weren't necessarily eaten before. But also, they're no longer living the active lifestyles that our not too long ago ancestors enjoyed. That's part of the problem with people still consuming large quantities of freshly made rice now, is we're starting to see sedentary lifestyles are causing people to bulk out in Asia, also because of the amount of rice that they still eat relative to vegetables and meat. So yeah, rice absolutely fed billions, has fed billions, continues to feed billions. But might have to have a conversation about how much rice people should be eating and other refined carbohydrates relative to their lifestyles. It's the same conversation we have to have in the West when it comes to refined carbohydrates like wheat and potatoes and whatnot, right? Because people are no longer living that farmer lifestyle. They're no longer living the laborer lifestyle for the most part. They're not working in factories hauling heavy pieces and equipment around. So yeah, we have to have a reckoning with ourselves and society about how we should live our lives and what kinds of foods we should consume are macronutrients as much as our micronutrients. So yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's see. Cutting a wingate past agate, old school harvested material from Death Valley, USA, making stud earrings and ringstones. Very cool, Reptile. Which means you should be my expert when it comes to gem faceting and whatnot. Awesome. Let me see. Let me see. Do I have knowledge about World War II? Yes, of course I do. I'm a student of history. And also I lived in Germany for 12 years. So when I say I have knowledge of World War II, I have knowledge of World War II from the perspective of the people who lost both world wars. In addition to, of course, what I learned in my own history classes. But World War II is a much bigger topic in Germany and across many German sites than it is in the US, because most people didn't experience the world wars from a first-person perspective in the US, whereas pretty much all Germans experienced both world wars from a first-person perspective. So, who were alive at the time. Obviously, many of them have now passed on, old age and all that. But when I moved to Germany for the first time, when I moved to Germany full stop in 2002, there were still a lot of people left alive from there were some World War I people still left living, and many World War II veterans. So I had interesting conversations, shall we say. Yep. Rachel is the big bad evil guy in the story monologue. Yep, that's me. The evil monologue that allows the hero to come and win. Oh, let me see. Oh, Jorge González, Gonzalo. Jorge Gonzalo, bienvenido. Gracias por venir. Let me see. Are you still in South Korea? I am currently in South Korea. I'm, shall we say, I'm long-term vacationing here. I'm not technically living here, so I'm in a vacation rental at the moment. But yeah, I'm currently in Daegu, South Korea, 100%. And for those who are wondering why I'm pulling stitches out, I'm pulling the basting stitches out of this sleeve because I'm ready to move on to the next phase on this sleeve, but that requires me to pull out the thread glue, basically. Do I know Feldlager? You mean, yes, of course I know what a Feldlager is. I mean, a Feldlager is a war camp. Unless you're talking about something more specific than what the word Feldlager actually means. Let me see. Sí, claro que hablo castellano o español, como se dice en América del Sur. Yeah, yes, I do. Spanish, believe it or not, was actually my second language, if that makes sense. Oh, this was silk. Yeah, so Spanish was my second language. The first country in which I studied abroad was Spain, and then Germany, and then France. Let me see. By the way, I was talking to my 103-year-old grandma, wow, and she was telling me about when the soldiers arrived back in Brazil. She said she couldn't take it and ran home. It was too sad. Yeah, yeah, I bet so. I bet so. Yeah, the world wars were pretty just horrific all around. Sí, sí, Jorge, hablo español. Entiendo un poco el inglés, pero no se me da hablarlo. Ah, vale. Hablaré la mayoría del tiempo en inglés porque todos en la mía comunidad hablan inglés, la mayoría hablan inglés, pero si necesitas que diga algo que repita algo en español, dígame. You look so beautiful, and I love your jewelry and tapestry background. Well, thank you. Yeah, I love ouïr, as it's called in French, the sound of hearing, my tapestry. And just so we're clear, this is a real tapestry. It's not a digital background. I hate those digital backgrounds so much. They look so artificial, and usually the people who are set back against them, they just don't look very good because parts of creators or people on YouTube who have set themselves against a digital background, parts of them when they move kind of vanish, right? So their face vanishes suddenly or their hair looks very odd. Yeah, I prefer to have real backdrops. Also, I prefer to have beautiful medieval furnishings, in historical furnishings, but especially medieval furnishings in my home in general. So, yep. Okay, why am I pulling out stitches? I've had such a great time sewing the first time. I've decided to do it again. Yeah, well, okay. So that's a reality, right? When you sew by hand, one of the most demoralizing acts in which one can engage is indeed having to pull out your own stitches because you did something crookedly or something incorrectly, or you need to make adjustments. It is so much easier to rip out machine stitches. Like, I have no problem ripping machine stitches. Oh, well, I have to rip them out. I'll just run it through the machine again. Hand done seams, though, it is soul stealing to have to not only redo the work, but undo the work that you did, which is why usually if I have to undo a seam, I'll ask someone else to undo the seam for me so that I only have to deal with the emotional trauma of redoing it rather than undoing it and redoing it. Look, we all have our coping mechanisms, okay? Okay, I think this was cotton, maybe? Okay, continuing onward. Let me see. Oh, gracias, Jorge. Muy amable de ti. Gracias. Yeah, so Jorge was just complimenting me on everything about the channel, basically. Yeah. Let me see. As a Brazilian, I can pretend to speak Spanish really well. Yeah, absolutely. So Brazilian Portuguese is very interesting because it's different from Portugal Portuguese, right? It's more of a hybrid between Spanish and Portuguese because Portugal Portuguese is still very isolated from Spain because of the mountains that basically separate it. But Brazilian Portuguese, I can understand. Right, no problem. I can understand Brazilian Portuguese like 90% of what people are saying when I hear it. Portugal Portuguese is like a language from another planet, right? And yeah, all of my friends who are from Brazil, they say the same thing. They're like, I can understand, and they say that about Spanish too. They say they can understand Spanish from Latin America if they're Brazilian and don't speak Spanish, but they can't understand Spanish from Spain, Castellano, like the really heavy, dense Spanish. It's really funny how that's the case. I also find that Latin American Spanish is often spoken more slowly, with the exception of Puerto Rico. Los puertorriqueños hablan que, yeah, like it's crazy. They talk like at 1,000 words a minute, right? But whereas most people in Latin America generally speak Spanish more slowly than they speak it in Spain. These are all generalizations, of course. So don't be offended, everyone. This is just my own personal experience with all of these languages. Your mileage can and will vary, of course, as always. Let me see. Yeah, so yeah, remember everyone, go ahead and hit like and double tap if you're on a mobile device and consider subscribing if you would like to keep following me. And of course, everyone, I have to remind everyone again, notification bell keeps turning people's notifications off. If you want to be notified when I say go live, then remember to click on the notification bell and make sure that all is ticked. If you do not tick on all, if you only have notifications on, but you haven't chosen all, then the algorithm will decide for you what it is you want to see and when you want to see it. So if you just want to know whenever I go live or whenever I upload a new video, which is I generally upload daily. I go live multiple times a week. I've been trying to get on a daily live schedule, but other things in my life sometimes prevent that from happening. So if you want to be notified when I go live, for instance, make sure you click on all. Oh goodness. Okay. Let me see. I got a bunch of 12th century songs in Gallego Portuguese. Oh, very cool, Tea with Tash. Do you mean to be able to the tunes or actually songs with lyrics as well? Yeah, let me tell you, Iberian music from the Middle Ages is fantastically interesting and complex because the peoples on the Iberian Peninsula are, of course, interacting with Moorish societies, with Arab societies, with medieval era music, medieval Arab food, medieval Arab culture. And so what you end up with is this really exotic sound that's a combination of European musical styles and Middle Eastern musical styles. And so the music is complex and interesting in ways that a lot of people don't expect medieval music to be. So I love medieval Iberian music. Really interesting stuff. The Cantigas de Santa Maria are filled with music that if you just heard the music and not the lyrics, you would swear that it was from somewhere in the Levant, in Syria, right? But it's not. It's from the Christian court of Alfonso el Sabio, right? The Alfonso el X, the 10th, right, of Castilla. And despite that, this music sounds like it could absolutely be from the Caliphate in Egypt or, the Caliphate over there in Syria at the time. So yeah, I love medieval Iberian music. Good on you for finding stuff. Really complex stuff. With lyrics, but I'm not that good of a singer, so I'm playing it. Yeah, I'm not that good of a singer. I don't have a natural singing voice at all, unfortunately. Una pregunta, ¿en dónde tú estás? ¿Cómo celebran el Nuevo Año? Okay, so the question is where I am right now, which is Korea. How do they celebrate the New Year? They don't really. The Western New Year is not a big deal here. The New Year that is a big deal is Lunar New Year, which is coming up at the end of January, early February. I looked up, it's based on the lunar calendar, so it rotates from year to year, so it's not always the same date. Lunar New Year is a family holiday here. Solal, it's called in Korean. And that is a very, it has a lot of, there's ancestor worship. So they go and they do what's called Chesak, which is the ancestral rites. So they make all this amazing food and they go lay it out. Either they go, if they can get to where their families are in mountain tombs or in cemeteries, they go and actually set up what's the word I'm looking for? An altar. They set up an altar to their ancestors and they lay it out with food and drink in this beautiful, very stylized fashion with these stylized pieces. They, bow and pray with their to and with their ancestors, and then they eat the food. So Lunar New Year is a family holiday in Korea, and it's a day devoted to ancestor worship, or a period devoted to ancestor worship. There are some traditional songs and dances that I have not been able to document them back very far, so I don't know how old any of them actually are. But depending on your family, how wealthy your family is, if they have mountain tombs, or if they just sort of have if your recent relatives have been cremated and buried in a columbaria, then probably they might do the rituals at home, the ancestral rituals at home, rather than going to the tomb in the mountains to do it. But Lunar New Year here is a big deal. Things shut down for multiple days. But it's not parties and festivities, not like that, not here. The big ruckus, fireworks and whatnot, that's more traditional in China for their New Year. But Western New Year is not really celebrated here. There's some people who are trying to Westernize themselves, I guess I would put it. And so they are starting to have like little New Year's parties and whatnot. Clubs might have a New Year's celebration, but that's not traditional, because the Gregorian calendar, the Julian calendar, that's not, it's not an Asian thing. Yeah, they celebrate the Lunar New Year though. And I haven't actually, so this was the Blue Dragon. I'm not tracking what this here is going to be actually. Yeah, slightly off topic, that necklace is lovely. Well, thank you. This was a friend of mine, a Dutch friend of mine, actually, from my Medieval Reenactment Society, who made this for me as a gift. She was taking a medieval jewelry making class, and she made this for me, right? And because I also do a lot of Burgundian fashions, Flemish fashions from the late 15th century, and this is a Flemish style pendant. But we do know, as I said earlier, that Florentine men and women in this era were also purchasing Flemish tapestries. They were purchasing Flemish garments, and they were purchasing Flemish jewelry, not to mention the fact that they were hiring Flemish artists to come to Florence and paint altarpieces for them, because the Florentines the Italians had a completely different style of art that was sort of, actually, I would say, more fantastical. It was softer. There was a lot less realism in it, whereas the Flemish masters had mastered the art of hyperrealism. And that was very fashionable in the Italies in the 15th century. So, like Jan van Eyck was hired to go down to Italy and paint. Hugo van der Goes was also hired to go down to Italy and paint. So yeah, there's a lot of cultural exchange between Burgundy and Florence, which is why I can confidently say that it's absolutely authentic for a Florentine lady who's living in Burgundy in the 15th century to dress either in her Florentine fashions or her Burgundian fashions, just the way I do. Yeah. Garnets are heavy. Yeah, they're little. They're pretty small. They're okay. They're not. Yeah. I guess I'm used to wearing really heavy things around on my body and around my neck, so I guess I just don't notice it. Yeah. Yeah. No vivo en Corea del Norte. Vivo en Corea del Sur. I live in South Korea. I don't live in South Korea. I'm vacationing in South Korea. We're hoping to make this more permanent, but the current flaming dumpster fire of a disaster of the current US administration means that we have not been able to procure the work that we thought we would be able to procure here, the government jobs, so we have to wait for that mess to clear itself up. So currently I am vacationing in South Korea. Americans do not go to North Korea and live stream. Americans also don't go to North Korea and generally come back alive, I should point out. Usually, Americans who go to North Korea end up in a, what do they call them? Labor camps. I think they call them labor camps or re-education camps. Re-education camps. They call them re-education camps, right? Usually Americans come back from North Korea in pine boxes. So no, I definitely am not in North Korea. I'm in South Korea. Now, there are some fantastic historical sites I would desperately like to visit in North Korea. There's these tombs from the Goguryeo era, which is like 5th, 6th century AD, that depict Koreans in beautiful clothing. And it's some of our best visual evidence for clothing in that era, but they're all in North Korea. So I would love to go and visit those tombs. It is, however, unlikely to happen in my lifetime unless something really drastic changes. Okay, pulling out a needle now. So next on my list of things to do for these sleeves is, now that I've pulled the stitches out of one, I now have the second sleeve to do here. As you can see, it's already basted. It's already thread glued together. So now I'm just going to do a back stitch on it, to running back stitch to seam it together. Okay, so let me see. Yeah. No, North Korea, no hay ninguna libertad en Corea del Norte. Nada de nada. There is absolutely no freedom whatsoever in North Korea. It is, anyone who thinks there is needs to talk to some North Korean refugees here in South Korea, of which there are actually many, because they don't actually generally get here over the DMZ. They usually get here by going into China and then coming back around, because the DMZ is really heavily guarded. And we do occasionally have some refugees who make it over the DMZ, but they usually do so with bullet holes in their bodies. They survive, but they come with a little bit of lead poisoning that needs to be fixed once they get here. Okay, thanks for helping me cheer up. I find your streams half soothing, half exciting. Oh, it's been a rough day? Oh God, I'm really sorry to hear that. Well, I hope that's part of my goal with these live streams, is to inspire people and bring them some joy and happiness, right? This world doesn't have enough of that right now. Let me see. Does anyone spin silk thread? Yes. There are people who definitely, well, no, you don't, no, sorry, no. You don't need to spin silk thread. You might need to ply it, but you don't need to spin it. Silk thread comes in silk filaments. It doesn't need to be spun. So that's one of the beautiful things about silk production, is that it requires many fewer steps than wool or linen production do. Linen and way fewer than wool does. So yeah, you don't actually need to spin silk. You need to ply it, which means you take the threads that are the filaments that come off of the silk cocoon already hundreds of meters long, basically. So you might need to actually ply those around each other, so you get, you know, like double or triple twisted thread, like you might call it plied, but you don't need to spin it. Yep. Let me see. I'm planning to embroider geometric construction dress. Do you have any tips to be more accurate? To embroider a geometric construction dress. So what era? So geometric construction, but from what geography and era too, because that will change how I advise you in terms of accuracy. Yeah. You see. Let's see. Jorge just asked if I know how to do South Korean cooking. Yes, I'm very good at South Korean cooking. Over the years, many years that I've been in and out of Korea, I have absolutely taught myself a great deal of Korean cooking. So yeah, I do a lot of, I prepare, there's a lot of dishes I like to make. Dak various kinds of bulgogi, but the traditional way, not the garbage modern way involving corn syrup or pineapple of all weird things. Let me see. I really enjoy a variety of jeokbokkeum, which is basically stir-fried pork. I enjoy making steamed things like posam, which is steamed pork belly. I actually do know how I have made kimchi and I know how to make kimchi. Let's see, other dishes that I really enjoy making that are Korean. Oh, bibimbap, of course. I enjoy making lots of little banchan and then just making sort of a, rainbow rice bowl out of it. I enjoy, let's see, other dishes, other signature Korean dishes that I really like making. I enjoy making a lot of palace food, which is the much more subtly flavored cuisine that is from the Joseon dynasty or older, and that predates the inclusion of gochu, the red pepper, in their cuisine. A lot of people don't realize that Korean, the thing that makes, that most people associate as being the quintessential Korean food, gochu, is not. Red pepper is not quintessentially Korean. It's not originally Korean at all. In fact, it is originally from Mexico, Mexico. As Jorge, tú lo sabes que el pimiento de Chile viene de México, no del Corea del Sur. So yeah, I don't care very much for the taste of red pepper in everything. I don't mind it occasionally, but it's really gotten to become a predominant flavor in modern Korean dishes. However, if you look back at historic Korean cuisine, from before the Korean War, you will find out that a lot of dishes that now have so much red pepper in them didn't used to. The yangban, when gochu first arrived in Korea in the 18th century, the nobility and the aristocracy and the rich thought this, actually everyone thought, not just the rich, everyone thought, oh my God, this hurts. Why would you add this to food? And what ended up happening is someone figured out that if you added red pepper powder to kimchi, it would make it last longer. So the poor people started including gochu red pepper, gochugaru, red pepper powder, into their kimchi because it gave it a longer shelf life. It unsurprisingly retarded bacterial growth better than just straight up fermentation. But the aristocrats and the wealthy, and God knows the royal court, didn't need that. They didn't need to have kimchi that lasted longer. They could afford a little spoilage here and there. So the gochu was not incorporated into royal cuisine at all and didn't really become a mainstay of Korean cuisine until after the Korean War. So yeah, I actually enjoy preparing older style Korean dishes, and you can find those still in Korea and in Korean cookbooks. Korean fine dining. If you do Korean fine dining, you will often find that most of the dishes don't have red pepper in them. If it's traditional Korean fine dining and not modern fusion Korean fine dining. So yeah, love cooking Korean food, love eating Korean food, but I will only eat Korean food generally in Korea. I avoid it when I go abroad because it's not authentic and it's not very good usually compared to, Korean food. Let me see. Oh, yeah, claro. Claro que te gusta la comida picante. Porque eres mexicano. So I don't actually mind spicy food in the sense I don't mind food that has a bite, right? There are many medieval spices that also have a bite. Ginger has a bite. Cumin has a bite. Cloves have a bite. So I don't really mind the bite so much. It's actually the flavor profile. I don't like the flavor of red chili pepper in everything. Like I don't mind it occasionally, but the flavor, I can taste it. It's not just the heat, it's the flavor that I'm not necessarily terribly fond of in everything, right? It's good occasionally, but it's overwhelming if everything has that same flavor to me. Yeah. I've been told that the idea of Japanese curry isn't very Japanese. It is not. Japanese curry was basically introduced by the Dutch traders, as far as I can tell, back in like the 17th century. So it was their interpretation of what curry was from India, right? But it was mixed with their idea of soup, and so that's how you get Japanese curry. That's why it's not very Japanese. Yeah, just like tonkatsu is not actually very Japanese. That's also from Europe. How many languages can you speak? I can, when I recover my fluency, I have at points been fluent in Italian, Spanish, German, and French. Unfortunately, for the most part, I only get to speak English and a little bit of Korean these days, so all of my other languages are a little rusty. But if you give me a couple of days in Spain or France or Germany, it all comes right back. So I guess I'm fluent in 4, 5, I don't know. Let me see. Where did chili originate? In Mexico. Chili originated in Mexico. And chili was part of the Columbian exchange that saw foodstuffs exchanged between the Americas and Eurasia, right? So peppers were one part of that exchange. So I'd like you to imagine for a moment Indian curry with no peppers of any kind in them. Right. I'd like you to imagine for a moment Korean cuisine with no chili peppers of any kind in them. I would like you to imagine Italian food with no tomatoes in them, because tomatoes were another part of the Columbian exchange. So it's really fascinating to me anyway, how predominant a lot of these imported vegetables became in European and Asian cuisine. I mean, it didn't happen instantly. It took centuries. It literally took centuries from the time Columbus brought back, things like potatoes, tomatoes, corn, and maize, as you might call it, and peppers, chili peppers back. It actually took quite a while for those foodstuffs to take root in various parts of Europe and Asia. But once they took root, then suddenly they became foundational to those cuisines. And that is fascinating to me because, red pepper, for instance, there was nothing like it really in Eurasia. So it's not like it replaced another thing. It became a completely new thing that people decided they loved. Tomatoes, same idea. There was nothing like a tomato in Europe, certainly not in Italy. And yet, now most people cannot imagine Italian food, including many Italians, honestly, can't imagine much Italian food without tomatoes being at least at the base of it. Even if it's not the predominant thing, it needs to be in there enhancing the flavors. So yeah, a lot of the foodstuffs that are now fundamental in Western cuisine aren't Western, aren't Eurasian at all. They're Americas. So that's studying the history of food is very interesting from that perspective, seeing how tastes change over time, how the exposure to a completely new foodstuff can completely revolutionize the flavor palette of an entire culture, or in the case of Eurasia, an entire supercontinent. Yeah, I bet chili traders were very successful back in the day. Yeah, at first, not so much. It took a little while for people to literally to warm up to chili peppers. They didn't, the Portuguese. Yeah, it took a little while, and depending on where you were, there was a different level of uptake. If you understand what I'm saying, right? There is a different level of acceptance depending on where you went. Like I said, in Korea, it wasn't until the 20th century that gochugaru, red chili pepper powder, or red chili peppers at all, gochu, were accepted as a standard part of the cuisine, not just something that poor people use to keep their food from spoiling. You are a smart woman and you're teaching knowledge. Thank you. Oh, well, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, if you're enjoying, please double tap that screen or click the like button, however you're watching. Consider subscribing. And make sure if you want to know when I launch things, go live, etc., click the all on the notification bell. Yeah, I actually have yeah, I've been off on that food history tangent. Any more questions about the history of food? Any foodstuffs whose origins baffle you or make you ponder? So, in reading this 17th century, this early 17th century Persian cookbook, one of the things I've noticed that was surprising, and not in a pleasant way surprising, is that none of the recipes seem to call for pomegranate syrup, pomegranate molasses. I love pomegranate molasses. I can eat pomegranate molasses straight out of the jar. I make my own pomegranate molasses, by the way. I was very disappointed that instead of pomegranate molasses, they have date molasses and sugar syrup, not even sugar molasses, sugar syrup. I love pomegranate molasses, so I was really sad that that doesn't, at least in this particular collection of recipes, it's never mentioned, not once. Just makes me so sad. Because what I love about pomegranate molasses is that it's sweet and sour at the same time, and it has that fantastic dimension of pomegranate arils. Whereas date molasses is just kind of sweet. I mean, it isn't kind of sweet. It's just super sweet. There's no sour component, and it does not have the complexity of flavor that pomegranate molasses has. So now I've got to go down the rabbit hole. I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to. I really do need to go down the rabbit hole of when did pomegranate molasses make its debut in cuisine, and where was it that pomegranate molasses first made its debut? Yeah, I haven't had a chance. Oh, poo. This thread is not happy. I haven't had a chance to check that out yet, but I plan to. Oh, I really need to find, damn it, I still haven't found my sewing wax. I think the cat's made off with my sewing wax. For those of you who do hand sewing, and let me tell you why you need to wax your thread. I'll show you. Might be able to see it. Okay, see that little gnarl of thread there? That's because my thread frayed because it wasn't waxed. And then one of the two levels of plying, because this is twice double plied cotton thread, literally just shredded away and just is now this nasty little bulky knot. Thankfully, this is on the inside, so it's not really going to matter. But what that means is that my thread is now weaker. I really need to find my freaking sewing wax. Gosh darn it. I think the kitty's made off with all of my little balls of wax, which means that if I move furniture, I'll probably find it under cabinets and whatnot. Yeah. Waxing thread keeps it from salt in the air. Also that. Waxing your thread has a very wide array of benefits. It allows it to last longer. Although what they have noticed from medieval garments is, especially the garments that are washed a lot, like the white linen garments, the wax is no longer there. The washing process does take the wax off of the thread, especially if you use soap, which they did when washing medieval whites. So it will not last forever. The wax will not. It will last longer on garments that are not laundered in soap. This gown will certainly not be laundered in water with soap. It will be stain treated at most, maybe occasionally soaked in a tub of cold water to get the dust out of it, because there will be dust, no doubt, that will be sucked up by the wool weave as I'm walking around and the gown is training on the ground. But that does not mean that it will be subjected to a wet wash process, shall we say. Yeah. Let me see. Back room in the fabric box of the coffee table is a huge chunk. Yeah, I know, but that's literally very far away from this camera. And lately I've only been doing hand sewing mostly when I'm out and about. So then I realize at that point generally, oh my gosh, I don't have my sewing wax. Well, when I get home, I'll look for the sewing wax. And then I get home and I get distracted by the cats wanting something or needing to eat or needing to drink because it's super dry here in the winter and I'm really thirsty. And then I forget all about my sewing wax until I'm here in front of you in a live stream sewing without sewing wax. I think you all can see the problem. Ugh, damn, some crooked stitches. Okay, so if you've got, this is because I didn't actually do what I should do. So, okay, so honestly, everyone, and I think I'll go ahead and clear this board off and do this. You should mark your lines. You should, in chalk or tailor's soap, if you're going to hand sew, it's just much better if you mark your lines, because even if you try to eyeball that you're maintaining an even distance, you're not always going to. So I'm just going to clear this off for a moment and chalk my lines so that I actually keep a nice straight seam. And actually I'm going to use my tailor's soap. Tailor's soap also wipes away, although it's probably better to use on a garment you're actually going to wash with wet washing, but I don't care so much because it's going to be on the inside and it won't be visible because the seam is getting entirely incorporated. Okay, I've got a piece of tailor's soap here. Okay, just going to, so you can actually see what I'm doing. So if, Ryan, do you happen to know where the rulers are? I've got this. Okay, so when I'm sewing something by hand and it's a straight seam, then I can just use a straight edge, measure down a 1/2 inch or a 1/4 inch or whatever, and just draw along that straight edge. However, this sleeve is curvy because my arms are lithe and muscular and curvy. And so this is designed to actually follow the curves of my arm to give you that really sexy skinny sleeve look that you see in the second half of the last quarter of the 15th century in Burgundian gowns. So what that means is I can't use a straight edge to mark a line. So when I can't use a straight edge to mark a line, what I do then is I just measure at regular intervals. I measure in from the edge at regular intervals, the exact same measurement, like a dashed line, and then I just connect the dots. So that's what I'm about to do here. I think you can see. Okay, yes. Right, so connecting the dots. Da, da, da. So first I make my series of dashes, and this is actually a very narrow seam. It's going to be a 1/4 inch from the edge. Yeah, 1/4 inch from the edge. Oh, yeah, that's centimeters. Depends. I honestly, I speak both imperial and metric, so it's not a big deal. There, and then here. So this is going to take a little bit more concentration, everyone, so I apologize. The monologuing will stop for a brief moment, except this. Welcome to my world. This is how my brain works. So I actually just listened to a fantastic and fascinating podcast on medievalist.net. Dr. Danielle Sobalski maintains that site. Highly recommend you check it out if you're interested in even more amazing medievalist content. This is a very old podcast, though, back during COVID. She did a podcast with a scholar, a medieval historian from Stanford, I think, who published this very interesting book on medieval measuring. And I know that sounds like a terribly dry subject, but his book is on my list of books to procure, because he actually delves in, it's specifically measuring in Italy, and he delves into the history of standardized measures across various Italian city-states in the Middle Ages. And he provides all kinds of primary source citations and references, and he connects it to the importance of standardized measurements in daily life, which I frankly love. Okay, this is actually 1/2 inch seam allowance, whatever, it's a 1/2 inch seam allowance. We're going with that. So yeah, some of the things he noted, for instance, did you know, and I knew this, but I'd forgotten this, that various cities would actually provide standard measures, not just for lengths of fabric like the L, but they would also provide standard measures for a loaf of bread and bricks. And there were actually molds that were installed in, say, the corner of the city hall that would provide you could compare against to know whether your bricks or your bread was actually the standard size. And if it wasn't, then you could actually, sue, or you could be fined. As the customer, you could be sued. As the customer, you could sue. As the merchant, you could be fined or sued if you did not stick to the standardized size. Now, I knew about the standardized L because all across Germany in medieval cities, if you go to the old, wherever the old city wall was, or sometime the old city hall was, you can actually find an L, a medieval L built into the corner there as a point of comparison against which people could measure. But I didn't know about the standardized brick mold, and I didn't know about the standardized bread size. So that was really interesting from this podcast. He also made a good point. You know, the history of official measurement is not just a question of the measurement itself, but how you measure. Like in something as imprecise as this measuring tape, where do you actually start measuring? Where does empty space start, and when does the measurable space start? And you know, if you're measuring things that should actually be measured by weight and not by volume, like grain, cities would actually pass statutes that said you were only allowed, if you were, you know, measuring grain out for someone, for a customer, you were only allowed to tap the container once. Like you couldn't go tap to get more and more and more, right? You could only tap it once. So there was absolutely an acknowledgement that how you measure was as important with how much you measure, and that regulating how one measured was a really key aspect of medieval commerce. So it was a very interesting podcast. It's very far back, like it's in among their earliest podcasts, so you'd have to dig back for it. But I'm definitely going to procure that book, and I will, once I finish reading that book, I'm confident I will have even more interesting information to share with you. Yeah, unfortunately, this thing no longer has the edge that it once had. It used to be quite edgy. Yeah. The cats will probably soon hear the thread falling to the ground, and they will come running. Oh, so speaking of measuring, one of my more recent interesting discoveries, and I did a short about this, was about the extant farsetto, extant doublet of Pandolfo Malatesta, in which I figured out by rereading the original Italian archaeology report, I ascertained that the tailor that made the garment for him had actually left in a large seam allowance, a very large seam allowance, 1-inch seam allowance, which clearly was intended to allow room to grow. Now, I thought it was fascinating that a technique that is absolutely used in modern tailoring, you know, leaving room to grow in suits, for instance. I thought it was really fascinating that here we have proof that that practice was still a going concern in 15th century Italy. And then I realized that Diego di Cavaniglia's doublet similarly had a very large seam allowance. Now, I posted that video where I made this observation, and I've gotten a bunch of kind of smarmy responses. Well, of course that's how they did it. We do it that way now. Okay, but I would like everyone to realize that just because we do something this way now doesn't mean that's how we've always done it. There is always a point of innovation when a practice is new and shiny and innovative, right? And so what I was trying to point out to people is that here we can document the innovation, the idea of building extra seam allowance into garments for growth. We can now document it to 15th century Italy, because the reality is that most of the extant medieval garments we have don't have extra seam allowance built into them. They've got really narrow seam allowances, in fact. So for me to be able to point to extant medieval garments and say, look, they've got extra unused seam allowance built into them, should make people excited, not make people come out with their know-it-all responses of, well, of course, this is how modern suits are made. You should never assume that modern techniques were applied in any pre-modern world, let alone the medieval world, when tailoring was actually in some ways way more sophisticated and technically challenging than modern tailoring is. Thinking specifically of the grande assiette sleeve. I'm thinking of the curvature of doublets with the padded chests, right? Which, yes, you see that in not modern suits, but shaped suits from the first half of the 20th century, especially I'm thinking frock coats. But that's not a technique that was invented in the 20th century. That technique dates to at least the 16th, if not the 15th century, and the 14th century, actually. So, yeah, just want to put that out there. Just because a technique is being used now doesn't mean it's been that way forever. In fact, frequently it hasn't been that way forever if it's being used now. Not because we're better than people were, but often because we're lazier than people were and we want cheaper things now. Yeah. Let me see. Is it the Emanuele Luigi book? I went searching and that came up. Yes. King Ching Li. Yeah, Ching Li. Yes, it is the Emanuele Luigi book. Absolutely, I highly recommend it. He cites all of his sources, plenty of footnotes, but he specifically worked to keep the main body of the text interesting and relatively light and readable, while providing in the footnotes the detailed information on which his statements are based. I appreciate that he's trying to make a topic like measuring, which is not necessarily the sexiest topic, accessible to a more average audience, while also providing the meat, the nitty-gritty for those of us who are not an average audience. So I'm very excited to go and find the book and see what he has to say, because weights and measures are a key part of daily life. And especially in these cookbooks that often don't contain weights and measures, you never know what interesting details you might find in the statutes that might inform, for example, how we can recreate recipes. Completely unrelated, I just remembered you posted a picture of Dufay and Bachois a year ago. I did. And there is an additional and more personalized depiction of Dufoy on his tombstone. Oh, interesting. I have not been to Dufoy's tombstone. Have you been to Dufoy's tombstone? That is interesting. If you can reach out to me on any of the ways that I'm out there to be reached and share that picture with me, that would be really fascinating. What is my knowledge of medieval UFOs? Not much. I could tell you more about debated depictions of UFOs in, ancient Mayan art or ancient Egyptian art or ancient Babylonian art or ancient Chinese art than I could about medieval. The medieval world has a lot of interesting things that come into it, but I'm not so familiar with the prominence of UFOs in medieval art. Let me see. I don't know. Some guys are really into women's measurements. Yeah, Nevis, you're not wrong there. Yeah, Ching Li, I never thought to look into Dufay's will. I'll have to look for that. Wills are some of the most interesting windows into past material culture, because a will shows what a person owned, often in detail, and it shows sort of what was part of their daily life, therefore, because these bequests will list specifically what it is that people are actually, oh, thank God, the needle's still here, what it is that people are bequeathing, for instance. So, and wills, depending on where you are in medieval Europe, wills were created by almost across all levels of society. So not just the wealthy, but middle class and lower middle class had wills. And so even if they only have a few items to bequeath, they still would write a will. Now, wills actually usually come with a pretty sad story. Nearly always wills are composed when people think they're dying. Medieval people don't tend to make wills very far in advance of the impending doom. But for example, we have a lot of wills from expectant women, so women who are pregnant, and they know that there's a good likelihood that they're going to die. And so they draw up a will before they give birth, because there's no guarantee and very high chance, in fact, that they won't survive past the process of the labor itself and or the lying in bed afterwards. So yeah, a lot of wills are actually composed at a time when the bequestor is they think they're on their deathbed, or they're on the out. They're on their way out at any rate. So yeah, wills, I love wills. Wills are some of my favorite sources for medieval material culture, because they go into they delve into details sometimes, especially if there's a death inventory. That's another thing that's really interesting. Death inventories are even better than wills, because wills can be vague sometimes. Wills can say things like, I bequeath all of my belongings to the Priory of St. John, and done. Like, okay, well, there's no itemization there. But death inventories are where you definitely get into the details of what a person owns. Because what happens at a death inventory is that an official comes and goes through the deceased's belongings. If they own the home, then they go through the whole home and they do a detailed listing of everything they find in every single box, in every nook and cranny. And then, of course, part of the point of that is to give it a value so that in the distribution of the estate, the people who've been bequested things walk away with the respective amount they should, based on the value of the estate. So that is why death inventories are even better than wills. But I'd still love to see Dufoi's will. That would be really interesting. Okay, let's see. Heck, I recall reading that inventories of a couple of literal serf wills. Yeah, absolutely. Even serfs. That's just it. People have the wrong idea about what serfs were. They also tend to have the wrong idea about, say, the role of the function, the social position, and the freedom of movement that, say, ancient Roman slaves had. Like, they tend to apply American black chattel slavery concepts to the ideas of slavery in other cultures and times and places, and that actually is usually not an accurate representation of how their lives were, what kinds of freedoms they actually had. Serfs are a prime example there. Yeah, I have read serfs' wills also. And some serfs were actually, people also like to equate serfdom with poverty, but that isn't historically always true. And in the Middle Ages, it's often not true. So, when people think of poor serfs, what they're thinking of are actually like French serfs in the 18th century or Russian serfs at the end of the 19th century. So that's a different world than the medieval world. Yeah. Let me see. They absolutely are interesting. Dufay died a very wealthy man. It was interesting to read what he had and what he gave to Cambrai Cathedral, some relatives, etc. Yeah, I've got to get my hands on that will. If you can reach out to me, if you actually just know where that will is, and let me know, and then I don't have to go searching for it, I'd be super duper grateful, Tingli. Yeah, Dufay. So most people don't realize how crucial music was in the Burgundian court. The Burgundian court of the 15th century has been largely forgotten by the modern world because Charles the Bold blew it all to hell by dying stupidly in a battle that he didn't need to fight and in which he didn't need to die. But before that happened, the Burgundian court was the dominant powerhouse of Europe. It was the dominant political powerhouse. It was the dominant economic powerhouse. It was the dominant cultural powerhouse. And the dukes of Burgundy and the duchesses of Burgundy, the ducal couples of Burgundy were major patrons of the arts. Major patrons of the arts. And one of the very sophisticated forms of patronage in which they engaged was music schools. They actually set up music schools. They had resident musician programs, basically, like they kind of have now in certain, networks and companies, right? But they actually had, this is not a new concept. The Burgundian court had that, and they fostered the complex development of music. The development of complex music. They fostered the evolution of music, the innovation of musical stylings. Modern classical music, I would argue, owes its existence to the court of Burgundy. Fight me. I would say that Bach and Beethoven and Mozart owe their fame and their existence to the court of Burgundy. And so, they actually did in fact have famous rock star, what we would consider a rock star musician. The Burgundian court had them, and everyone in Europe knew who they were. Everyone who is anyone in Europe knew who they were, right? I'm talking Binchois, I'm talking Josquin des Prés, I'm talking Dufoy, I'm talking Machaut, right? These are all names that in the 15th century would have been household names in all of the courts of Europe. So yeah, I would love to see Dufoy's will, because I'm, like you said, he died a wealthy man. He should have been a wealthy man. He was paid, the Burgundian dukes paid their minstrels handsomely. I have encountered multiple chronicles, starting with Philip the Bold in the 14th century, that part of the Christmas ritual traditions in the court of Burgundy was to pay the minstrels handsomely. It was like their big annual bonus. It was presented to them in the midst of the Christmas feasting, and they were paid handsomely and publicly. Yeah. Let me see. As far as I know, there's a transcript of a biography by Alejandro Planchard in 2018, and that's where I read about it. So you haven't actually found the will itself. It's referenced in that work. Okay, no problem. I can find it. I have Google Foo. Now that I know it exists, I can go and look for it. And for those who are wondering, when I encounter sources like this that are of particular interest, I share them first and sometimes only with my patrons and my channel members. So I have an active Creative Contessa Discord server. And if you would like access to extra material, for example, like wills and inventories that I find, digital wills and inventories that I find, to conversations that we have about creative historical pursuits. If you would like to just chat with me on a more direct basis and with members of the community, then or access to extra videos, full tutorials that no one else gets to see for free, then consider becoming a channel member or a patron on Patreon, and then you get access to all of that and more depending on your level of patronage or membership. And for those of you who are very kind and regularly leave me super chats, if you want to be included in my Discord and get access to those extra comments, please reach out to me. Like you are also supporting me financially, so you definitely deserve access to those bonuses. So you have to reach out to me because I have to manually add you. Yep. Let me see. Did the maiden open her heart to the master's requests? The mistress ignores us. I haven't ignored anyone. Have I ignored anyone? If I missed something, then I apologize. I actually just read another interesting, in this book about medieval Italian etiquette, they actually compiled not just medieval manuals of etiquette from Italy, but they also went and searched through literature from 13th through 16th century Italy and found passages of literature that also reference interactions and, say, court protocol and manners. And there was a very interesting, I have to go and find out what this was from. There was an interesting passage from a text about a queen and a king getting married and about the wedding night. And it actually talked about, there's actually this conversation that takes place in the bridal chamber between the king and the queen. And it's actually a very beautiful conversation. So yeah, that talking about, will my mistress accept me? Or that made me think of that. It was a very interesting passage. Let me see. Just shared you with my Gemmy friends. Hope to see them here. Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate that, reptiles. So for those who are wondering what I'm doing, I am doing a running back stitch to sew this sleeve together. This is a Burgundian sleeve of my very sexy, very fashionable new Burgundian gown. And I am just doing what's referred to as a running back stitch. So it's like a back stitch and it's literally like a back stitch and a running stitch had a baby. And why do I put this here? Because this sleeve will be under the seam will be under some wear and tear, but and pulling and motion, but there will not be an overabundance of stress, shall we say. So a running back stitch is a good combination of the virtues of a running stitch, which is that it's fast, and a back stitch, which is that it's firm, right? So it allows both. And always, although when I get to, you all distract me with these conversations that we have, or my monologues that you inspire me to undertake. Whenever I'm doing hand stitching, I regularly, I try anyway, every 20 to 30 stitches or so, depending on the stitch, or every 10 stitches in a longer stitch, I actually put a knot in, so that if the stitches come undone, which they will, they're supposed to, it's just what happens with stitches. If the stitches come undone, then they'll only come undone to the last point at which I put in a knot. However, if I don't put a knot in at regular intervals, then the stitches are likely to just keep coming undone. So, hand sewing tip in general is to throw a knot in every 20 to 30 stitches, depending on the kind of stitch in question and how tight they are, etc. Okay, let me see. So one of the interesting things I noticed in reading this new 13th century, 12th or early 13th century manual of etiquette that I have recently discovered, it's called the Art of the Civilized Man. And it's written in Latin originally, but thankfully there is an English translation of it in its entirety. And it was very interesting reading some of the passages on table etiquette, because it really does show that between the 15th century, when we have the Baby's Book and the Book of Carving, you can see that many of the ideas of what counts as good table manners in the 12th century continue to be the same ideas of good table manners in the 15th century. And it also shows that people continue to misbehave between these two centuries in ways that not only would we find disgusting, but people back then found disgusting as well. So for one of my favorite passages in this 12th century book of etiquette is a reference to secret wind. Can you guess what secret wind might be? And basically it says that if you find yourself in need of relieving secret wind, then you should leave the hall or leave the company of people, go find a quiet and hidden spot somewhere, preferably outside, and expel the secret wind there. You should not offend or assault your companions with your secret wind. And the suggestion is that at best, you should try to hold it. Don't even just hold it entirely. That's a term I think we need to add to our parlance in English or your respective language of choice. Secret wind. But this brings us back to this false idea of the Middle Ages being a time when people smelled bad and everything smelled bad, and people didn't care that they smelled bad. So this 12th/13th century book of etiquette makes reference often to things needing to smell good and to not doing things that make things smell bad, right? It makes reference, for example, to the secret wind. If everyone stinks, then secret winds aren't going to bother anyone. For instance, if your great hall smells bad because it's the Middle Ages and everything is obviously disgusting, then no one's going to notice if you pass some secret wind. But the fact that they mention in the 15th century Baby's Book and this 12th century Book of the Civilized Man, they both mention flatulence and talk about how disgusting it is, tells me from the get-go that people's living spaces do not smell bad. That's we all kind of have an idea of how secret winds smell depending on what you eat, but generally there's a range there. So we all know what it smells like. So that gives us as a modern person, it actually gives us a reasonable understanding of what bad smells were considered in the Middle Ages. Like we can actually understand, oh yeah, that does smell bad. And they thought it smelled bad too. So I thought that was a really interesting emphasis. There's a whole paragraph about secret winds and how you should deal with them. And that they are not appropriate for public company, and that you should avoid it at all costs, right? So further evidence bordering on proof that medieval people, as a general rule, did not smell bad, did not want to smell bad, prized smelling nice and making things smell nice where they could. Now, where I will always yield is whether medieval cities and towns smelled foully or not. And the reality is they probably did in many places and in many times in the pre-modern world, not just the Middle Ages, guys. Come on, not just the Middle Ages. 19th century and earlier. Yes, most cities probably smelled pretty foul because you had animals doing their business everywhere. Yes, they would have people go and collect up that manure because that manure was a precious resource, but it would still be there for a good part of the time. And the urine that animals would release would just kind of get into the mud and it would not smell great. Yes, people were not necessarily always disposing of waste products of all kinds in the best manner, depending on the city where you're living. You've got medieval production of tanning works and dyeing works smelt awful. Really awful. But if any of you have ever lived near factories, say paper mills, you will know that even in the modern world, certain cities smell pretty terrible. I'm thinking of the Tacoma aroma for those of you who are from the Pacific Northwest, back when the paper plants were still open and functioning in Tacoma. So yeah, but generally people wanted to smell nice themselves and they wanted the spaces, their interior spaces, to smell likewise. So, this 12th century book of etiquette just underscores that idea on multiple levels. It also talks about some more disgusting, even less appetizing topics. For example, what to do when you blow your nose, and specifically that you should not blow it into your hand. And if you do blow it into your hand, you shouldn't look at it afterwards. Don't examine it. Actually, it says don't examine what you've blown into your hand. And I'm thinking, people do that? Okay. But then I think about people who blow their nose now into a handkerchief or a tissue. Very often people do look to see what's come out. So that's another way in which we modern people are still connected to our ancestors. Apparently, there has always been a curiosity about what we have just produced from our bodies. And I think we all just need to be honest with ourselves about that. I think we should be fair, right? Okay, I've joined a little late. Hi, everyone. Amy, nice. Thank you for joining us. Welcome for those of you, so a good time to reintroduce everyone. Welcome to my medieval sewing party. I am the Contessa. I am working on a sleeve for my new 15th century Burgundian gown, doing a backstitch and holding forth about topics of medieval material culture, especially my more recent readings and learnings as they spring to mind. If you have questions about what I'm doing or about medieval material culture in general, how people dressed, how they bathed, what they ate, etc., pop them in the live stream and I will definitely endeavor to answer them for you. Okay, let's see. Potty humor is perennial. Yep, 100%. 100%. Potty humor never seems to go out of fashion, shall we say. Where did my little, oh no, did I not? Oh, I did. It's here. Okay. My markings, because I had to restart my thread. My markings have gotten a little dim, so I'm just going to remark this seam here. There were some really interesting, there were some other really interesting learnings from this book of etiquette, also perhaps disturbing. One of them, and I have to go back and look at the Latin because it's a translation from the Latin. And as a professional translator, I don't always trust other people's translations because there's a lot of bias that can go into a translation, or people can misinterpret. Actually, even the best trained translator can misinterpret text. So I want to go back and look because there's a passage that says, if you are a guest or a servant or a courier, you should not relieve yourself on the master's premises. And that was the specific syntax in English. So I was wondering, I have to go back and look at the Latin to see whether they really mean that by literally on the premises, or if they mean as in, please don't pee on the ground. Don't pee in the courtyard. Don't pee on the side of the building. This doesn't belong to you. You don't get to pee on it. Or if it just means that you shouldn't relieve yourself at all. No, don't use the urinal, don't use the privy, don't use a bucket, right? Don't relieve yourself at all when you are present within the premises. I kind of think actually it's the former, that they really mean they have to tell people, don't pee on the master's wall, don't pee on his courtyard, don't pee next to the horses in the courtyard, right? I think they're actually telling them, because I think this probably was a problem. People think, oh, it's outside, I can just relieve myself wherever. And that's not appropriate. But it does go on to say the master can relieve himself on the premises, but you cannot. So, basically, he owns the place. He can do whatever he wants to it. You don't own it. It's not yours. You don't get to just urinate wherever. I can't imagine that if someone is a guest, that they're not allowed to use the privy, right? I'm pretty certain that it's specifically don't pee on the building. Don't pee on the courtyard. Relieve yourself in an appropriate place where it can be disposed of, I think is probably what they're saying. This manual was aimed at young men of training to be clerks or to become members of the court. This was aimed. It has a very specific bias to it, shall we say, in terms of the expectations of behavior are not particularly high. Rather, the expectations of how people will behave without this set of instructions are very low. And yeah, so like I said, aimed at young men in their teens, maybe tweens, who need some guidance in how to appropriately conduct themselves in the court, as it were. Yeah. It's very interesting. Not in my pool. Yeah, for example, reptile. Not in the pool, not in the common bath, right? Not in the public bathhouse either, please. Yeah, there's a lot of very interesting, there is a kind of window that a book of etiquette will offer you that other kinds of texts will not, because a book of etiquette, you only write down rules generally. One only writes down rules for behaviors in which people are actually engaging that are found to be offensive. So yeah, it's very interesting to see how it somewhat indirectly how people are probably misbehaving. It's just like today. Not everyone abides by the common rules of etiquette in anyone's culture. For instance, I observed to some of my Korean friends that it must be not be considered rude in Korea to chew with your mouth open or to talk with your mouth full. And my friend said to me, oh no, it's still rude, but everyone does it anyway. Like, it's not considered good etiquette. But what I've noticed is that a lot of people in Korea talk with their mouth full and chew with their mouths open, but they're not supposed to, but people still do it. Same thing as in the United States. You're not supposed to talk with your mouth full. You're not supposed to chew with your mouth open, and yet a lot of people do it. So yeah, there's always a debate about how much these books of etiquette reflect actual practice or desired ideal outcomes. But I think for that, we can assume that the behaviors that are mentioned therein, or against which there are prohibitions, were still at some level therefore considered inappropriate and disgusting. Just like now, not everyone is going to abide by those rules, and some people will only abide by them in certain circumstances. In fact, one of the interesting caveats in this particular manual of etiquette was that this is how you behave when you are in the home of your betters. The ellipsis of that is, the unspoken part of that is perhaps, but when you're by yourself or you're with your inferiors, you can do whatever you want, And see, I'm trying to teach the kids table manners and they won't stop. Yeah. We had some issues teaching our children table manners as well, because the co-parent probably didn't seem to care, whereas we cared a lot. about a variety of table manners, including actually, uh, cutting your food and chewing it and not just like sticking your face in the plate and sucking basically. So yeah, we've it was a battle for us as well. But co-parenting is very challenging, especially when you don't get along with your co-parent necessarily. Yeah. Okay, let me check back through the comments. Oh, thank you, Aletheos. Really appreciate that. I just shared you. Oh, yeah. Okay, we're that far back. Okay. I'm not certain if the chat, if you've all just been listening to me and so not putting questions in the chat, or if the chat has just decided to not show me the questions. So if you have a question and I didn't get to it, try putting it in the chat again and I will endeavor to answer it. But teaching children table manners, not a new concept in the least. And people violating those table manners, also not a new concept in the least. But, the other interesting thing that you can pick up from these books of etiquette, especially the section on table manners, is the kind of plates and dishes and utensils that they used when eating. Because in this 12th century manual, in the 13th and 14th, 15th, and 16th century Italian table manner manuals, they mention how to use or not to use your plates, your cups, your spoons, your knives. But you know what implement they don't mention? Forks. So anyone who keeps insisting, oh, they had forks in medieval Italy, because there's this story about a Byzantine princess in Venice who brings forks with her. And so she introduced them. And so everyone is using forks. So if I'm doing a medieval Italian impression, I can use a fork. Wrong. Wrong. I have seen zero credible evidence of medieval Italians using forks in dining. And the fact that all of these books of etiquette about table manners that I have now read from the Italies and France and Germany and England, and none of them mention forks, but they mention spoons and they mention knives. So I'm sorry, but no, medieval people did not use forks to eat. As far as we can tell, forks were not a thing that you used to take food from your plate to your mouth. Forks were serving implements, right? You would use a fork to take dainties in some cases from the serving platter and put them on your trencher or your plate, but you wouldn't then use it to convey them to your mouth, right? That was reserved for serving. The other interesting thing that is clearly an issue is hygiene is mentioned a lot in these manuals, right? And specifically the idea that you should not cross-contaminate. So you should not stick your fingers in your mouth and lick them off. Several of these different manuals mention that specifically, and they say by sticking your fingers in your mouth to clean them, you are making them more unclean than if they just had food on them. Right? So there's this idea that putting your fingers in your mouth and then touching other food or objects leads to unpleasant health outcomes. Yes, the medieval era is the era of miasma theory, not germ theory. But that doesn't mean that they were stupid and that they didn't engage in observational science, right? They could observe that if people stick their fingers in their mouth, suck on them, and then touch food and dishes, and other people touch the food and dishes, then everyone gets sick, right? They were able to observe that and see that in action and realize that the culprit was sticking your fingers in your mouth. So all of these manuals have strictures against cleaning your fingers in your mouth. But what they do say is that you should absolutely clean your fingers with water and a cloth before the meal, after the meal, and during the meal. Washing your hands was very important in medieval European society. And it's not just something that the wealthy did. They even specify that in the winter you should have warm water for washing your hands, and in the summer you should have cold. Of course, that's a humoral balance thing. I'm pretty certain. Okay, comments. Let me see. I think the best way to eat food is with our clean hands. It's even proven scientifically, 100%. Yeah, so medieval people ate a lot with their fingers. There is another book of etiquette that actually specifies which finger and thumb combination should be for each kind of food. Like I don't remember offhand. I have to go look it up again. One of the fingers is for meat, one of the fingers is for fish, one of the fingers is for fowl, those are separate categories. So, a lot of medieval food is in fact eaten with your fingers. Food was supposed to be served bite size so that you would just pick up the morsel and pop it in your mouth. You didn't need to carve it at table. You didn't need to cut it further. And this is part of the problem with a lot of reconstructions of medieval feasts. The kitchens aren't carving things properly. They're not actually sending them out in the state where they're already cut up into bite-sized pieces. And so that leads people to say, oh, well, clearly I need a fork and I need a knife to carve it into smaller pieces. No, you really don't generally. That should already be taken care of for you. But yeah, a lot of medieval, you were supposed to use your fingers, you were supposed to use a knife, and you would use a spoon for things that were liquidy or saucy, mostly liquidy, like soups and pottages. But for the most part, you are supposed to be eating with your fingers, which is why they had finger bowls often at the table, or a servant would come through, depending on the degree of the event, would come through regularly with a basin of water and a towel so that you could, ablute your fingers, ablute your hands, basically. Better digestion through slower eating and thorough chewing, improved nutrient absorption, stronger connection to food. 100%. We eat way too quickly. We live too quickly. Honestly, in the modern world, we flat out live too quickly. We should be living slower, more gradually paced lives. But unfortunately, the invention of the clock and then factories kind of changed the way we live, and now we live way too fast. People should chew slowly, and the medieval manuals of dining etiquette and table manners specify this. They actually specify that you should be chewing slowly. So it was a problem even in the Middle Ages that people were eating too quickly. They actually said, they observed, you need to chew slowly, you need to chew thoroughly, you need to swallow. They say you need to chew your food and swallow and then drink, not drink while chewing. They actually say it's disgusting to people if you drink while chewing. And if you think about it, yeah, that's pretty gross, because you're gonna have to open your mouth full of food and put liquid in, and that's gross. So even in the medieval European world, that was considered disgusting. It was also considered unhealthy. It was considered unnutritious to chew your food too quickly and scarf it down. So even the medieval health manuals specify that you need to chew thoroughly and slowly and deliberately. Do not scarf your food. There was a really great simile. Do not scarf your food like a dog like a dog desperate to not have his food taken, or something like that. Yeah, 100%. There's a lot we could learn from the medieval world, honestly. A lot we could learn from. There's a lot of things we shouldn't learn from the medieval world. Granted, but I think we should be willing to look back at the way we did things in the past, we as humans, and re-examine practices we've discarded, and maybe reconsider that we should re-implement those practices in our lives. Unfortunately, human progress tends to have a baby in the bathwater effect, which is to say, if we decide that one practice is deleterious to society, and it possibly is, we then discard all practices that are contemporary with that bad one and move on to some new innovative way of approaching our lives and our interactions, rather than actually being more discreet and deliberate about how we innovate practices in our lives, how we reevaluate, how we revolutionize and evolve the way we live our lives. I think that's a big problem with modern society. Let me see. Yep. Okay. No comments. So for those just joining, welcome to the Creative Contessa Medieval Sewing Party. I am the Contessa. I am hand sewing the sleeves of a fashionable 15th century gown in the style that would have been worn by the inimitable Margaret of York, Princess of the House of York and Duchess of Burgundy, later Madame la Grande herself, one of the richest women possibly in the history of Europe. Are we back? I'm sorry. I don't know why we just disconnected and reconnected. Sunstar, welcome. Welcome to my medieval sewing party. Is anyone working on anything creative themselves right now? Go ahead and take a moment to like if you're enjoying. Also, double tap the screen if you have a mobile device. So I have prepared for this gown, I have prepared the panels of the dress itself. I did manually baste together the lining and the shell, but I will be doing all of the long seams by sewing machine because I would like this dress to be finished relatively quickly. And there's plenty of hand sewing that will still need to be done. So I'm relegating all of the invisible, well, most of the invisible long seams are going to be done therefore by the machine so that I can focus on the handwork that is visible and getting this dress done. So the plan is that this will have silk velvet cuffs and a collar and ultimately a silk velvet guard around the, basically trimming the outer hem. And that will be, it's kind of a nice, it's actually a fur colored silk velvet. So it will actually in some ways look like fur, which is the point. And what's nice about the collar and the cuffs is that they will hypothetically be removable. I mean, they'll be whip stitched into place, but you know, if I have a damsel to assist me, I could wake up in the morning and say, my dear, I would like the black velvet collar instead of the brown velvet collar. Please make the appropriate replacements before I dress. Right? That is, I am very confident that is often how it went in the medieval world. And possibly it was even the night before. The night before, the lady, as she was preparing for bed, would say to her damsels, tomorrow I shall be wearing this gown, but I would like this other collar on it. Please make sure that's done by tomorrow morning. And then a team of damsels would descend upon the gown. They would undo the whip stitches holding the collar and cuffs in place and replace and attach on the new one, which is finished and ready to go. So it's entirely finished as a separate kind of garment, basically. And then it just needs to be whip stitched into place. So that's the plan. I actually am planning to make a couple of colors, sets of colors and cuffs in different splendid fabrics so that I have more options for this beautiful black broadcloth dress. Let me see. Let me go back. Okay. I am practice. Oh goodness. Okay. A bunch just came through. I'm sorry. I'm going to go back and read through the live chat. Like a whole lot of comments just came through. Reptile, thank you for still being with us. I'm glad I'm back. Medieval is my favorite clothing. Medieval clothing is pretty awesome. On the last few chapters of the novel I'm writing. Very cool, Abby. Are you writing while the live stream? Am I just kind of running in the background as a companion while you write? That would be pretty cool if so. Gelbaline says, I'm practicing embroidery. Very cool. I asked earlier about embroidery, but I don't have a specific location in mind. I don't know much. Okay. So embroidery is done. Let me talk about embroidery and medieval clothing in general. There are basically two ways of embroidering a garment. One is to embroider the garment directly. The other is to embroider appliques and then whip stitch those embroidered pieces of fabric onto your garment. Both were done, and there's evidence of both being done more or less across most of the Middle Ages in Europe. I have an example on my green silk gamora, which I haven't worn in a while because it's fussy and I really prefer to have help to get into that dress. My green silk gamora has that beautiful gold fleur-de-lis embroidery on it. That's an applique. I embroidered that onto a piece of linen and then cut it and it whip stitched it onto the sleeve, right? I honestly recommend, if you're doing larger pieces of embroidery, I honestly recommend that you do an applique on a separate piece of fabric. Why? Because then if you end up needing to wash the garment, for instance, then you can remove the applique and wash the garment and the embroidery will not be damaged. Two, if the garment starts to wear off to the point where it can no longer be used as is, then you can easily just remove the embroidery applique and put it on a different garment. However, medieval people absolutely did also embroider the garments themselves directly. So if you're doing a geometric construction gown. So for instance, if your geometric construction gown is from the 12th century, we have lots of evidence of applique embroidered collars around and cuffs from that era. So, and generally in that era, it's geometric patterns of embroidery, not necessarily, you know, it's, and that's kind of, for the most part, it's either geometric or it's shapes, it's figurative. It's not human forms that are being embroidered. The exception there is, there's a couple of exceptions. One kind of embroidery that commonly features humans as a subject are love tokens. For example, aumônière pouches for alms that are actually very clearly were a gift from a lover, or depict people, lovers usually. Also, another exception to the embroidery being generally figurative, you know, being shapes and not humans, is ecclesiastical garments. Ecclesiastical garments are heavily covered in figures of saints and Jesus and God and Mary. So, yeah, or biblical figures. So there you will often see large swaths of people being represented. But if you are making a geometric construction garment, you know, if it's depending on its era, like if it's 12th century, if it's 13th century, I would suggest doing applique embroidery. So embroidering a collar, embroidering cuffs, and then attaching that on rather than embroidering the garment itself is my recommendation. And in that era, you know, you've got the common stitches. You've got the bayou style stitch, which is a kind of topside embroidery. You also have a topside couching. You also have split stitch and chain stitch. And yeah, topside couching, split stitch, and chain stitch are pretty heavily used in that era. Yeah, so that would be my recommendations. If you want embroidery on a garment, it's definitely much easier to embroider separate fabric, cut it out, applique it on, than it is to embroider the garment itself. It's also much, much easier. It's very hard. If you're going to embroider the garment itself, the problem is you have to embroider it before it's finished because you need to put it under tension. So you're also going to need a pretty big frame. Okay, I guess you could use a hoop frame, right? But that's not how medieval embroidery frames were not hoop frames. They were big ass, like picture style frames, giant. And so if you were going to embroider a garment, you would actually need to put the panel of the garment, the entire panel, under tension. So you would end up needing a much bigger frame. Whereas applique, you can work on a smaller scale. So yeah, applique embroidery is just so much easier than embroidering directly on the garment. And I know some people embroider without putting the garment under tension, or they use the embroidery hoops. The problem with embroidery hoops is that they stretch. They can sometimes kind of semi-permanently put a stretch into your garment. So you end up with this three-dimensional pop-up where the hoop stretched the fabric out and held it in that attitude, right? Whereas a medieval embroidery frame, you actually lash the edges of the piece of fabric under even tension straight out and away from itself. So there's no malformation of the fabric itself the way embroidery hoops do. I actually have a video, a project vlog on this channel on my beautiful 15th century Italian embroider applique. If you want to check that out, I provide lots of information about medieval embroidery practices. I demonstrate many of them myself, and also lessons learned. So feel free to go and check that out after this live stream if you're interested in learning more about medieval embroidery for clothing, for fashion purposes. Let me see, was working on some art inspired by 14th and 15th century musical stuff, but now I'm taking a break. Cool, very neat. The dress you have on is gorgeous. Thank you. This is a dress I made 23 years ago, 22 years? No, 23 years ago. Yeah, I made this dress 23 years ago. It is in the style of Florence in the 80s to 90s, or 1470s to 90s. And yeah, it's held up pretty well over the years, shall we say. I've put a lot of literal miles on this dress. Let me see. The only connection between your sleeve and the body of your outfit is at the top of your shoulders. Yes, that is correct, right there. So there are different styles of sleeve from the 15th century. This one is only connected at the very top here, giving me full range of motion, which is great, and also allowing for the alluring poof of underclothing. You can see my underwear, right? for the alluring poof of white through the sleeves. And there are different kinds of sleeves, even from this era, though. There are some sleeves that are much more attached. But if you look at the sleeve cap, they actually have gathers over the top of the sleeve, around the sleeve where it's attached. So you still have a pretty full range of motion. And the sleeve cap is pretty full, whereas this is a much more fitted style of sleeve cap than those would be. Yeah, so yes, this one is only attached at the top, and there's another style where it has some lace holes here. My green Gamora has some lace holes here, but it's lacing, and the lacing allows you the flexibility to still lift your arm up, right? And then it comes back together kind of naturally when your arm is down, and then it flexes to allow the arm up when you raise it. So there's a couple of different styles. This style is the kind that's only attached at the very top. That is correct. Let me see. Got another big astrological talisman operation in about a week and a half. That's pretty cool, Nevis. That's nice. Isn't it faster and easier to do embroidery with a sewing machine, or is hand embroidery more beautiful than doing it with a machine? That's a great question. I personally think that hand embroidery is infinitely more beautiful than machine embroidery. Machine embroidery always looks machine. And it looks, honestly, I see machine embroidery and I think, gosh, that's so cold and soulless. It isn't very beautiful to me. It looks like mass-produced whatever. Whereas hand embroidery just has such a more elegant aspect to it. And because there's a certain way you can embroider by hand that you can't accomplish with a machine because of how machines work versus how hands work. So you can actually, I can always spot machine embroidery 100% of the time. I can spot machine embroidery. Right. So yeah, I think hand embroidery is much more beautiful, but also many of us in the community, in the living history community, we are seeking for more authenticity in our kits. So we want to do things the old way, the medieval way, avoiding machines where possible. The only reason I'm using machine for the long seams on this new dress is because my dresses are literally wearing out. This one is wearing out too. The fabric is wearing out. I need to replace my dresses more quickly, and it takes me too long with everything else I have to do in my life to actually, because I don't have time to just sew. I've got 1,000 other things I have to do every day. So I don't have time actually to sew all of these seams by hand and keep up with the rate of replacement that my dresses now need. So, because I often do long-term medieval living history events where I'm dressing in medieval clothes straight for 2 weeks. And, you know, I need to have enough clothes to get through that, especially to maintain my status as an affluent Contessa. I can't be seen in the same dress every day. So, that's why I am choosing to use the machine for the long seams, but we'll still be doing all of the top stitching by hand. Because many of us not only prefer the look of the hand sewn things, but we also just want it to be as authentic as possible. But that's a personal choice, right? Everyone gets to choose their level of authenticity, and I will not judge you for what you choose to do for your own personal medieval or historical endeavors, fashion endeavors, right? Okay, so once again, I'm going to ask everyone to welcome, if you've just joined us, to my medieval sewing party, and please hit that thumbs up or double tap your screen. Jim, welcome. Lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us again this evening. Okay, I might have gotten a bit behind in the comments. I apologize. Embroidery was popular when I was a kid back in the 60s and the 70s. Yeah, there was, in the 60s and 70s, there was this whole arts and crafts movement that was kind of part of the flower power movement. It was part of the anti-establishment movement, the anti-capitalist movement, the anti-the man movement, right? It kind of, those that all tied in together. Let me see. Thank you. I'll do cuffs and collar. Flora was not common for embroidery in the 12th or 13th century. So when you say flora, so the kinds of motifs that were popular in 12th and 13th century, say French, Spanish, or French, Italian, English, even Spanish, actually, now that I think about it. The motifs that were popular were either geometric or vines. Vines were very popular. But if you're talking about flowers that would be recognizable as such, not really. Not that I can think of some stylized, like highly stylized to the point where the average viewer might not realize they're flowers. But actually like accurate representations of flowers, I haven't seen that represented in either the extant embroidery that has survived, the extant garments that have survived, or in the artistic record. Yeah, so for the most part, 12th and 13th century, it seems to be geometric shapes. It seems to be, or vines. Vines are very popular. Okay. Let me see. I really am trying to get my friends here, but they are stone cutters. So yeah, Riptail, it's okay. I totally appreciate that, me talking on a wide variety of topics and not just gemstones and jewelry is maybe not interesting to, gem cutters. I appreciate you trying though, Reptile, really do. Okay, so let me just show you where we are. Oh, there's something I might have to fix there. Well, we'll see. Anyway, okay. So the long stitches, again, are the basting stitches. So those are just the thread glue, right, that hold the layers together. And then those stitches that's a running back stitch all the way down. Getting pretty close to being done with this side of the seam, so that's great. I should also say that medieval embroidery that has survived from both the embroidery that actually has survived and the records about embroidery all seem to point towards silk, of course, being the primary choice for the upper classes, the affluent, shall we say. Oh no, I don't want the silk, I want the cotton. For the affluent, shall we say. And then you have, wool sometimes makes an appearance. But linen, very, very rarely. It's mostly silk. Most embroidery seems to be done in silk. And, there's many good reasons for that. Silk has a beautiful sheen to it, and it reflects, it shines so beautifully, especially in candlelight. It's also smoother. It is pretty durable, actually. Wool tends to fluff out. Linen embroidery. Now, we might not have much in the way of records of linen embroidery because of either prejudice against linen or because it was what only the lower class people who didn't necessarily keep records were doing. But linen is also not easy to dye necessarily. And it's not very good at retaining the color. It fades. So linen would have been not a good choice for embroidery because even if it is dyed, it's going to fade much more quickly than silk will. And wool would just make very fluffy embroidery. We see lots of wool embroidery from the first millennium. By lots, I mean relative to the amount that has survived. Of the embroidery that I have seen that has survived from the first millennium, a great deal of it is wool, which is to say like 5 pieces that I've seen. A great deal of it is wool. But as you get into the second millennium, so, 12th century going forward, embroidery seems to nearly always be silk. Now, I'm not saying you have to do silk. I'm just sharing that information with you. It's very often silk. And it's very often done, with the exception of the Bayeux tapestry, which actually has some pretty large gauge yarn in it. It often seems to be done with very, very fine thread. Relatively fine thread. Lots of it. Lots of fine thread. Fine thread for the Middle Ages in any case. Maybe not as fine as, say, modern Japanese embroidery silk, which is so fine that you could probably use it to sever people's limbs. But yeah. Silk was the thread of choice. And I actually just learned, speaking of embroidery, I just learned a very interesting new theory about the Bayeux tapestry and the space for which it was created. So the Bayeux tapestry is not a tapestry, it's an embroidery. It's a wall hanging, but it's not a tapestry. Remember, tapestry is a weave. Wall hanging is anything you put on the wall. Not all tapestries are wall hangings. There are tapestries that are meant to go on the ground. The Dukes of Burgundy had tapestry carpets, basically, that were heraldic, that were mats that were put in front of them in front of their throne for official ceremonies, for instance. So tapestry is a weave, technically. The Bayeux tapestry is an embroidered wall hanging, though. It's not a tapestry at all, not even a little bit. And, it's really, really long. It's crazy long, and it's not very wide. All of which has always made people wonder, where was this thing kept? Well, the newest theory that I just read, and the second I read it, I was an epiphany. I literally said to myself, oh, of course. They think it was for the refractory of at an abbey. So the dining hall, the main dining hall of the monks of an abbey, they think it was meant to decorate the dining hall because of the dimensions. The dimensions are basically a pretty standard dining hall in abbeys at the end of the 11th century. So when I read that, I thought, yeah, that completely makes sense. So it could go on the wall just high enough so that it's visible above the backs of the chairs, right? And everyone can see it clearly, but it's not going to cover the whole walls the way we imagine modern or later medieval wall hangings to do. So that made a whole lot of sense to me. So yeah, I'm pretty certain that is probably the winner. It was probably meant for to decorate the dining hall of an abbey. Yeah. Okay, if you have any specific questions about medieval material culture, if you have questions about anything I'm wearing or the thing on which I'm working, just let me know. If you are engaged in any creative projects, please do share because I'm always interested in hearing about what you all are doing, how other people are exploring their creativity, whether historic or modern. One of you asked me an interesting question a little bit ago. What what modern activity do I do that might surprise people? And I think people might not expect me to say that I'm a avid swing dancer. I'm an avid Lindy Hopper. I love Lindy Hop. I love Charleston. I love Balboa. I love those 20s through 40s vintage social dances. I think they are super duper fun. Also Argentine tango. Love the Argentine tango. So I thought that might surprise some of you to know that outside of my beautiful 15th century world, I actually do pursue a whole host of other kinds of creative endeavors. In fact, I just recently here in Korea, where I'm currently visiting, um, I partook of a Minhwa painting class, painting experience where we painted an adorable, adorable Korean tiger who's flirting with a butterfly and a peony. And it was really, Minhwa is mistranslated often as folk art, even though it's not folk art in any real way. It's just the opposite of court art. And it's this very whimsical style that portrays the world in a much softer light. It uses watercolor on rice paper. And it was this fantastic teacher guided us, me and a friend of mine, through the process step by step. She told us how to do all the blending. We got to grind pigments and add water to it to make our own paints. It was just really just a lovely experience. So I also love painting. I do love painting. My first creative art was actually drawing and then painting. I didn't come to the sartorial crafts really until the age of 14. But before that, I spent a lot of time in class drawing instead of paying attention to the teachers. It wasn't really the teacher's fault. The reality is that I've always been maybe too smart for my own good, and that's not a brag at all. And it meant that if something wasn't interesting and engaging, I just wouldn't pay attention, which is not a good attitude to take towards teachers, them sharing their time and skills with me, but that's how I was as a child. I regret it. I understand why some of my teachers probably didn't like me very much, and I don't blame them. I was a smarmy know-it-all, 100%. Let me see. No, okay. So let me see if I'm missing some comments here. Sometimes doing this will help. Yes, so there. Have I tried spinning? I have. I have not done wheel spinning. I have done some drop spinning. I haven't done it in any kind of enough to actually get any decent at it, but I have done it. I can do it. I understand the mechanics behind it. Interestingly, about spinning in the Middle Ages, they had what's called a walking wheel, which is not like the little spinning wheel at which you sit. It's literally this big wheel, and you have to walk forwards and backwards while driving the wheel with your hand, by the way, and doing the spinning. So that kind of yarn, the yarn that was made from the walking wheel, was considered to be inferior to the wool, to the thread, the thread spun by drop spindle. And so there were actually guild statutes in a variety of places in weavers' guilds that limited the use of yarn from the walking wheel to weft only, and that the warp thread had to be from the drop spindle. So most people imagine, well, the spinning wheel must produce an absolutely higher quality of yarn, but apparently that wasn't true in the Middle Ages. That's how good drop spinsters were. that they produced a superior grade of yarn and thread to walking wheels. And that's another way that reading, a lot of people who recreate costumes, historical costumes, historical clothing, they only ever focus on the art. They rarely actually start digging deeper, or textile artists, right? They only look at the archaeology maybe, but you need to read a wide variety of sources if you're going to understand clothing, for instance. So people don't necessarily think to look at the guild statutes to inform an idea about medieval attitudes towards textiles, or the reality of those textiles when we're looking to recreate them. So I do, though. I read all the things: literature, guild statutes, regulations, folk tales by people like Giovanni Boccaccio and Chaucer that often present aspects of medieval material culture that we would not really be able to find in any other source from the era. Yeah. To really understand any aspect of any era, you have to read more than just texts about that specific narrow aspect, especially if you're doing research. Obviously, if you're reading a book that's written on the topic of medieval fashion, someone else has probably done the research for you. But if you're doing like original research yourself, you can't just look at inventories and archaeology for clothing, for instance. You have to go way broader. You're like a modern day Da Vinci, from medieval historian to medieval embroidery to cooking to Argentine tango to swing dancing. What's next? You're an astronaut also? Yeah, I have a wide array of interests. Honestly, I would love eternal youth and immortality, not because I fear death, but because I want to keep learning and doing. Because I can't imagine ever getting bored in this world. I'm never bored. I am never, ever, ever bored. Boredom is not something from which I suffer, because courtesy of the internet, I always have access to interesting things to read wherever I am, or I bring my projects with me wherever I go. And if I travel, then I'm always learning new, exciting things about the world. So I am never, ever, ever bored because I'm just eternally curious. Yeah, I am a bit of a Da Vinci. I'm a bit of a Renaissance woman. And maybe like Da Vinci, I may never actually create anything actually real or tangible that's worth keeping. Da Vinci is legendary for a couple of reasons that have nothing to do with what he actually accomplished in life, and the objects he's left behind. Right? He was not a very prolific painter. He just wasn't, and he had issues. Talk about ADHD. He had issues finishing his works, real issues, and he was hired mostly. Very often, not as, he was hired by the Duke of Milan, not for his artistry. He was hired to be an engineer. And what did Da Vinci actually end up creating for that court? Not much that actually ever got put to use. So yeah, I guess I can empathize with Da Vinci on a couple of different levels, probably. I'm crocheting a shawl in my late wife's heraldic colors. Oh, that is beautiful. What kind of shawl? Like a longer shawl or a closed shawl, which I guess might make it a poncho or an open shawl. That's really beautiful. Out of what are you knitting it? Out of wool or silk or linen or some other combination of fibers? I didn't realize until a couple of years ago that it was possible to knit things out of wool. Not wool, sorry, of course it's possible to knit things out of wool, out of linen. But I actually have linen knitting yarn now, which I use frequently for finger loop braiding because it makes really great practical finger loop braids. This is linen knitting yarn, actually. Love it. It's fantastic stuff. Thank God for the internet. Imagine going from library to library just to learn. Okay, but I will say that's how I started my learning process, was having to go from library to library just to learn. And I love libraries. I love libraries. I love the feel of the books. I love the smell of the books. I love libraries where I can walk through the stacks. Right? Because if you can't walk through the way I discovered a lot of the random books about medieval and Renaissance material culture that I have was by walking through the stacks of my university library in places where I wouldn't necessarily expect to find things, and discovering books that I would never have thought to try to look for. So I love libraries. I think libraries are super valuable, and I think we definitely need to make sure we still have printed books because we are one electromagnetic pulse away from losing it all. And civilizations that only had one copy of all of their works in one place, we should curse them because we now have none of those copies anymore, right? So yeah, I think I love physical libraries, and I love being able to go to them and enjoy them. However, I am not often in a place where there are good libraries that are going to have the kind of materials I need. Here in Korea, the libraries don't have a lot of Western literature or Western history books, and certainly don't have original medieval manuscripts, for instance. So for that, I'm extremely grateful that the digitization that libraries have undertaken has made these resources so much more accessible and easily accessible. But I still love libraries, and I still love real books. And we definitely need to not be just digital. We need a parallel analog and a parallel digital existence. I think we will regret our civilization's choices in the future if we try to go all digital. Yeah. Rant off. Let me see. Okay, yeah. Which by the way, that wasn't let me see. Dunk Dunkap. That wasn't a stab at you. Like I totally I love the resources that we now have. Oh my God, I wish we'd had these digital resources when I started this journey 30 plus years ago. I mean, I'd be so much further along. So not a criticism, but we definitely also need libraries. Let me see. Go analog for sure. We understand history because people made marks in clay tablets. Just saying. Yep, absolutely. Absolutely 100%. I do agree libraries are important. I'm still glad we can have an option to learn and read from the comforts of our homes. Yeah, 100%. And you know what I love about the digitization of all of these books and collections and manuscripts is that it has democratized access to knowledge. It has not only for people who don't have PhDs and access to these very rarefied collections, but also for people who can't afford to travel around the world and go to every museum and every library that contains these often rare books, right? It has made this information accessible to people across the socioeconomic strata, as long as you have internet access, which I get that that's a step for some people that some people don't have. But even still, I know many people who are basically shut-ins. They can't leave their homes because of their disabilities. But thanks to the internet and the fact that there is quality information also on the internet, they can learn also. They can experience the world in a certain way also. So, yes, I am a Luddite in many ways, but I do also embrace and appreciate the benefits of digitization. So, yeah, 100%. The kind of research I do now would have been almost impossible 30 years ago it was impossible when I started 30 years ago. It was impossible. I couldn't have done it. Okay, almost done here. So let's see. Today is, sorry, I lose track of time. Today is Tuesday, my time. For those of you who are wondering about my late medieval, sort of early Joseon research project into historical Korean clothing, Minji, my partner in crime, Dr. Minji Kim, Korean fashion historian, she has been accepted at the Fashion Institute of New York for a lecturer position. She's actually going to be an adjunct professor for the semester, which is fantastic because fashion historians are never given those kinds of positions. So she is moving to Manhattan, and so she has had to cut her time here in Korea short. So we have unfortunately therefore had to cut short our viewings of original historical Korean garments, but we will be continuing the collaboration. She will be coming back to Korea. I'll be coming back to Korea, and we will definitely continue our explorations because our initial exploration 2 weeks ago of those extant 16th century Korean skirts was so eye-opening. One of them had knife plates ironed into it. as an underskirt, which the second you iron knife pleats into a skirt, it's going to create volume, especially because it was like a hemp skirt. So it's going to create volume. And so that is evidence of one of the ways that in 16th century Korea, women were adding that crazy volume to their skirts by these pleated, what we would call a petticoat now, but in the 16th century wasn't called a petticoat necessarily. Yeah. So, yeah, we're going to be continuing that collaboration. It's just the viewing of the physical garments might be on pause. I'm going to see if there's any garments I can still view while I'm still here in Korea on my own. They might not let me in though because I don't have a PhD. I don't even have a master's degree. I just have a little old bachelor's degree. So I'm going to see what I might be able to still go and look at, but I might have to wait for her to come back because I might need her credentials to actually get access to these collections. Sadly, there is an academic snobbery at Korean institutions, and I don't necessarily blame them. Like, they don't want just some random Joe Schmo coming and fondling their 500-year-old garments. So, one of the easy ways to make sure someone isn't just a Joe Schmo is that they at least have a master's degree, I guess. So I don't blame them, but there is a certain level of snobbery there, nevertheless. So I'm going to try to see if I can get access to some of the other garments I'd already picked out, but otherwise I might just have to wait until Minji gets back to Korea to visit her family again. And I'll just have to make sure I'm here when she's here. That's just how it's going to have to go. Let me see. The Lead Pencil Club will rule the world again, 100%. So this brings me to a cautionary tale. I recently read an article in the New York Times, an opinion piece by a professor. I think she was a professor at Columbia, but don't hold me to that part. She is a professor, and she is a professor of philosophy. And apparently, recently, I think probably just like this last semester, in fact, she assigned the final test, the final exam was a take-home essay test. And it was very clear to her which of her students had used ChatGPT, because the philosophical question about which they were supposed to be writing is one that has a modern component, and their focus for this class was on the modern philosophical component, but it's also a topic, and this is relative to my channel, relevant to my channel, it's also a topic that is addressed in medieval theology. So it was very easy to know which of the students went home, plugged the question into ChatGPT, printed out an essay, and brought it back, because ChatGPT invariably chooses the medieval theology version of the question. And so these students were so stupid, so dumb, that it didn't even occur to them that they should check whether ChatGPT had covered the right topic. Not even that the information was correct, that it had even addressed the question with the correct information at all, with the correct kind of information, that it was the correct question that was being addressed. They didn't even bother to look, plugged it into ChatGPT, printed it out, turned it in. You can imagine she figured it out pretty much instantly. So we're now at this terrible crossroads where I think for learning to actually happen, and I think we need to value the idea that we should remember things ourselves, not that just we should be able to look it up at the drop of a hat in our external hard drive brain, right? We should have an internal hard drive also that has the same information, more or less, right? And I think we're going to need to go analog in schools. I think they're going to need to get kids off of devices. No more typing papers, no more access to the internet for papers. It's all going to have to be proctored in school. No more homework assignments that are written at home, because no one's actually going to do the assignment, right? They're just going to use ChatGPT. So they're going to actually have to do proctored homework sessions too. And I think they're going to have to actually provide students either with limited internet access that's only access to digital databases of books, for instance, and libraries, and actually watch them to make sure they are looking the information up and actually writing their own opinions down. I think that's where we're at. I think if we don't go analog in school again, we're at the cusp of a dark age. We're going to fall wholly and fully into the dark age unless we reevaluate the way in which we're using digital technologies in schools. And I think the only way to guarantee that students are actually doing the work themselves is pencil and paper and proctors and books, real books. Yeah, I think maybe you could have tablets that have digital resources, you know, books and journals and magazine articles and that sort of thing, but it's limited to that. No internet searches, no generalized internet searches, no chat GPT, no artificial intelligence whatsoever, because otherwise artificial intelligence will be the only intelligence left on the planet very shortly. So I feel very strongly about this. I will not back down on this opinion. We need to get kids off of the devices. And actually, you know, a lot of research is coming out that there's probably humans shouldn't be allowed on you know, portable devices anyway until they're 16 from a developmental perspective. In terms of like it's having impacts on eyesight in a massive increase in myopia in children, for instance. So yeah, I think not to mention health outcomes of just living on your device and never actually moving anywhere yourself. Okay, well, on that happy note, right here is the line of stitching, and it's a little crooked because you can tell where I got excited talking to you all. I may or may not feel the need to actually fix that because the reality is that wool is thick, right? You can see wool is thick and it actually can absorb seams that aren't perfectly straight. Silk does not absorb seams that aren't perfectly straight. When you're sewing in silk, you don't want any bubbles. Wool, on the other hand, is more forgiving. So yeah, I will, when I turn it inside out and see how it looks, I'll decide if I feel like redoing any of this. But this is kind of the wages of me sewing while talking to you all. I get excited and I stop paying attention to what I'm doing. So that the seam looks good at all is amazing. Let me see. Mustafa says, you're doing great work. It's refreshing to see a woman like you with positive perspective on all things, really. Oh, well, thank you. Really appreciate that. Tangi Argentini is a Dutch short film from 2006 that you ought to track down. I will take you up on that recommendation. Thank you. Have you been to a Latin Mass? I have been to a Latin Mass. Latin Masses are gorgeous. In fact, when I was in Florence in 2022, I think. It was either 2021 or 2022. I was wandering in Otranto through the vineyards outside of the city, just outside of the city, just beyond the city walls, beyond the Castella, the Fortaleza Belvedere. And I happened by this tiny 12th century church called the San Lorenzo. And I noticed that for the first time, its doors were open. I had wandered by it dozens of times. Part of my daily walking routine was to walk this particular country route. And the doors were open and there were people going in and the lights were on. And it was about 5 or 6 p.m. at this point. So the sun was setting and it was starting to get dark. And I noticed there was a sign that said that they were doing a concert of a Josquin des Prés Mass, the whole Mass. They were going to sing the whole Mass by Josquin des Prés, one of the court composers of the Duchy of Burgundy. And it was free. So I got to go into this 12th century church and just sit and listen for about half an hour to a Burgundian high Mass sung by this amazing choir of singers, with the sound reverberating off of the marble walls and the wooden beams of this stunning 12th century church out in the middle of the vineyards in Otranto on the other side of the river in Florence. It was magical. I did in fact record the whole thing. I've got the recording and I sometimes use it as background music because it's so beautiful. So yes, I have attended, and that wasn't the only Latin Mass I've ever attended, but I've actually heard a medieval Latin Mass, which is maybe the more important question you should be asking me. Let me see. I'm so sorry the Hanbok project was put on hold, but that's a great honor for Dr. Kim. So the Hanbok project is not on hold. It's just the in-person viewings that are possibly on hold. But we're going to be doing some like text documentary research and assembling that. And I'm going to take the lessons that I've already learned from this first visit, and I'm going to go ahead and make my first couple of skirts based on that. So it's not on hold. The extant garment viewings are maybe on hold, but I'll see what I can still get access to. Let me see. Humanity lost the legendary Library of Alexandria, absolutely, a pinnacle of ancient learning, and the House of Wisdom, a legendary intellectual center destroyed by the Mongols in Baghdad. Yeah, there are too many examples of libraries being destroyed that it just makes me so sad. So we need to have multiple copies of things stored in multiple places. And the Library of Alexandria wasn't destroyed just once, sadly. It was destroyed multiple times. It was set on fire by Caesar's troops accidentally, I think. In the first century BC, and then it was set on fire. It was destroyed again by Christian nut jobs in the 4th century. So yeah, my fellow proto-Christians or early Christians have a lot to answer for, and not much of it good. Okay, well, everyone, are there any final questions or comments? I'd like to, if anything about my clothing or any of the projects I'm working on. Otherwise, and while I give you a last chance for any last questions or comments, I'd like to thank my channel members and my patrons for financially supporting my work and my ability to share my learnings with you and to teach you in a way that maybe you've never learned before, but that is accessible and exciting. If you would like to become a patron or a channel member, please do so. Comes with a host of extra perks, access to ad-free videos, early access to videos, access to a large collection of tutorials and extra content to which no one has access except for my members and my patrons. Also, I have a private Creative Contessa Discord server where I share lots of extra resources and information as I come across it, all there for my patrons and my channel members. I'd like to thank those of you who have also left super chats and given me gems. I really appreciate all of your forms of support. And of course, I know not everyone is in a financial place where they can support a creator like me financially. So I just appreciate those of you who are part of my community, who subscribe, who follow me, who come to all of my live streams, who participate in the chat and make it a much more interesting and engaging place for me, as well as for everyone else who is here. Right. Oh, goodness. A whole bunch of comments just popped through. Of course. Oh, Virginia, one of my channel members. Thank you for joining. There's also something I vaguely recall hearing about the scent memory connection with real books, making it more effective for learning. Nothing beats the smell of a book. 100%. I'm a book sniffer. I will openly admit that the first thing I do when I crack open a new book is just plant my face in it and inhale deeply. Any other book sniffers out there? So the other thing about books and the benefit of books over digital sources is not just the smell, the olfactory memory is strong, but also the sensation of touching the pages, of turning the pages, creates a stronger memory. So the information you gain from reading a book will be held deeply, will go to long-term memory much more readily than information we scan on our devices. Also, the weight of the book in our hands, that tactile experience, creates a much deeper, more solid memory. Absolutely, 100%. Eau de book smell needs to be a perfume, 100%. Let me see. Okay, there's also something I vaguely recall. Oh, wait, no, sorry. I just got a. The Library of Alexandria was badly damaged multiple times. Ah, see, Neva says it there. The infant's final collapse was vastly overblown, though it had ceased to be an academic center over a century prior. And yeah, I agree 100%. Let me see. Just scrolling back, because like a whole bunch of comments just popped in at once the way they do. Yeah. Love the paper cuts you get from turning pages. Hey, I consider every one of those paper cuts a cut of affection from the book to me. It's the only way the book can show that it loves me is by giving me paper cuts. Okay, let me see. A chat about medieval scent would be very interesting. Oh, yes. So everyone, I'm going to have, so coming excitement, I'm going to have Dr. Minji Kim on the channel in a live stream at some point, talking about medieval and early modern clothing in the Joseon Dynasty and doing a Q&A. I'm going to have Sergey from Armor and Castings on for a live chat about making replica medieval jewelry. And I'm going to try to get Cosmetica Obscura on for a live stream where we can do a live chat Q&A about medieval cosmetics and medieval scents. But yeah, I can definitely talk about medieval smells because I actually know a lot about that. But I definitely want to get Cosmetica Obscura because they can talk about the process of recreating medieval cosmetics and medieval scents from original recipes. So that will be coming forth in the first quarter of the year, I'm pretty certain. Okay, everyone. Well, otherwise, if you are watching this and you had a question and I didn't answer it, I apologize. I didn't intentionally avoid it. The live chat moves really quickly sometimes. Pop it in the comments. I will see it and I will answer your question, especially if you're watching this as a recording. Then put your questions in the comments and I will absolutely see them. Otherwise, please hit the thumbs up. Consider becoming a member or a patron. And otherwise, until next time, everyone, may your adventures and learning be creative and unexpected as mine always is. Until next time, everyone, stay creative.